Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session before June 4th, 2018. Before I begin with the calendar, I had emailed on Friday a mass email. There were two administrative notices that came into effect for June 1st. One is sworn testimony at public hearings and effective June 1st. Pursuant to Local Law 103 of 2017 in relation to applications for variances and special permits. All testimony delivered at a public hearing by the applicant on the proposed application shall be sworn or affirmed under oath. Beginning with the board's public hearing on June 5th, 2018, all testimony is required to be sworn or affirmed under oath prior to its presentation by the applicant and by the applicant's consultants and representatives appearing as experts or fact witnesses to provide factual support on the application. Note, the board will not consider factual statements presented at the hearing on behalf of an applicant that has not been sworn or affirmed under oath.
This is pursuant to a local law that went into effect on June 1st.
Okay. The second administrative notice is regarding submissions of presentation materials used at community board hearings. Effective June 1st, pursuant to Local Law 103 of 2017 in relation to the applications for variances and special permits, if a public hearing is held by the affected community board or borough board, the applicant shall submit to the BSA a copy of any presentation materials utilized at the hearing, as well as a notarized statement executed under penalty of perjury that such materials are true and correct and as presented to the community board, and such community board may submit to the Board of Standards and Appeals a copy of any testimony presented or materials received from the applicant for such application. Where the affected community board or borough board holds a public hearing on an application for a variance or special permit on or after May 30th, 2018, the applicant's representative must submit 1, a copy of the presentation materials used at the hearing along with 2, a notarized statement executed under penalty of perjury that such materials are true and correct and are as presented to the effective community board and borough board. The affected community borough board and borough board is also welcome to submit copies of presentation materials used at the hearing. Examples of acceptable copies of presentation materials that are typically used include handouts, photographic copies of poster boards in PDF format, and printouts of PowerPoint presentations in PDF format. Copies of presentation materials are required to be electronically submitted to submit@bsa.nyc.gov with the applicable project manager CC'd if you know it, within 3 business days after the public hearing of the affected community board or borough board. Hard copies of electronic submissions must still be made in person at the board's office, 250 Broadway, 29th floor. An appointment is required and must be made between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. by calling 212-386-009.
And I just want to add that another part of the requirement is that all submissions to the board be certified as truthful. We're going to be releasing 2 cover sheets that the applicant has to sign when they submit their application materials that are essentially affirming the truthfulness of the materials submitted.
So that'll go out shortly too.
Right.
Okay. So, to the calendar. We are going to call 3 build-it-back cases.
No, we'll do it last.
No, she said first.
Yeah, we can
Do it first tomorrow.
You want to do it first? I thought you want to do it first today.
okay, that's fine.
Oh, okay, fine.
It's up to you.
No, just go ahead and order.
Do the regular one?
Yes.
Okay. New cases, on the special order calendar, new cases, item number 1, 16612A3, 638 East 11th Street, Manhattan. Should I call them together or just keep separately?
I think this one from the
This is
building
DOB.
department, keep it separate, and
Okay.
the other 2 together.
We'll call it together. Fine.
So you did, okay. So there are no notice requirements on this. This is an application by the Department of Buildings to re-argue the case. The applicant must show, in order to make a re-argument, that the board misapprehended the relevant facts or misapplied any controlling principles of law. In reviewing the issues that DOB raised, I don't agree that the board misapprehended any facts or misapplied any controlling principles of law. It seems like the DOB's real concerns are procedural ones, where for reasons yet unclear, but that were not brought before us at the hearings, DOB appears to be unable to work with a C of O that the board revoked partially. That is with respect to the back building and not the front building. So because the issues to which DOB objects are rooted in facts having to do with DOB procedures of which the board was not previously aware, this application to re-argue should be converted to an application to rehear the case. For a rehearing to be granted, there must have been substantial new evidence that was not available at the time of the hearing, or a material change in plans or circumstances. DOB's procedural difficulties appear to fit within these criteria, so I'd move to recast this as a rehearing request. Any other comments on this? No. Okay.
Item number 2, 16612A2, and item number 3, 10713A2. This is 638 East 11th Street also.
Okay, also no notice requirements for this. Again, this is an application to re-argue the case, and in order to make that, make a case for a re-argument, the board must have misapprehended the relevant facts or misapplied any controlling principles of law. The materials that the applicant submitted indicate merely disagreement with the board's conclusions, not a showing that facts were misapprehended or principles of law misapplied. Disagreements are settled in an Article 78 motion. The owner filed an Article 78 petition on April 9th, 2018, based on the BSA's decision, and Corporation Counsel has not yet submitted its answer, which is actually due June 8th. So I don't believe that the applicant has made a case for re-argument. However, as I believe DOB's procedural issues qualify for a rehearing to address such issues, and the owner is obviously a necessary party to any action involving its own property, it should be permitted to participate in the rehearing. So,
is that a rehearing or placing the matter back on the calendar?
Once it's been decided, the only way to reopen it, is to either re-argument or rehearing. Otherwise, it's a completely new application.
Item number 4, continued hearings, 2017-285A, 200 Amsterdam Avenue, Manhattan.
And I recuse from this.
Just call me.
Okay. So just to reiterate a brief history, appellant had Appellant had filed an appeal on October 26, 2017, thank you for correcting that, requesting a revocation of the building permit issued by DOB for the subject site at 200 Amsterdam Avenue. The two issues presented in this appeals are whether the subject zoning lot resulting from the 215 subdivision meets the definition of a zoning lot in section 2010 of the zoning resolution, and whether the subject zoning lot complies with all applicable open space requirements. The application was heard on March 27th. There were several speakers who testified for and against the revocation of building permit issued by DOB. Representatives from appellant, DOB, and the owners of both 200 Amsterdam and 170 West End Avenue testified. During the hearing, we had asked some follow-up questions for both the appellant, DOB, and also the owner of 200 Amsterdam Avenue to address. Specifically, they were, first, what is a lot of record, or another instance of recording in DOB that would lead one to believe that they were not solely referring to tax law. Second, DOB was asked to clarify its position for not revoking the permit when it's based on old interpretation. Third, with regards to the open space, DOB was asked to confirm if open space on the subject zoning lot complies with the zoning resolution and the DOB policy requirement for open space if it's satisfied at the time of issuance of permit or at the time of final inspection. And fourth, DOB and the owner's rep were asked to provide additional cases of partial lots, usage of partial lot. So I'll go through each point and I'll go to the commissioners to weigh in on it. So with regards to the first one, as to what is a lot of record or providing other instances. Appellant maintains its earlier position supported by a DOB draft bulletin and DOB's earlier submission that a lot of record, though not defined term, is same as a tax lot. Specifically, it states that, quote, because as of December 15, 1961, the only lot of records were tax lots as used in subparagraph A of the definition, lot of record means a tax lot. Appellant also states that a zoning lot may consist of an unsubdivided tract of land, however, that a subparagraph C or D zoning lot need not consist of a lot or lots of record. Appellant also states that on December 15, 1961, when the decision of zoning lot became effective, the only lots of record were tax lots as shown on tax maps. Based on the information provided, I believe no new supporting evidence were offered. To further support his position, appellant refers to the zoning handbook, where the appellant states, zoning handbook, quote, translated the phrase with regards to a tract of land either unsubdivided or consisting of tract of land consisting of two or more contiguous lots of record as tax lots. I want to remind everybody that zoning handbook provides a disclaimer which reads as follows. Zoning handbook provides a brief overview of the zoning rules and regulations of New York City and is not intended to serve as a substitute for actual regulations which are to be found in the zoning resolution of the City of New York. I want to emphasize that point. And this is available in print, also online at www.nyc.gov/planning. The city disclaims any liability for errors that may be contained herein and shall not be responsible for any damages consequential or actual arising out of or in connection with the use of this information. So we need to look to the definition in the zoning resolution. Appellant states that the drafters of the 1961 zoning resolution defined a subparagraph A zoning lot as consisting of the lot of record, i.e., a tax lot as in all of Manhattan and large portions of the Bronx, Brooklyn, Eastern Queens, and Northern Staten Island, and a subparagraph B or C zoning lots consisting of undivided tracts of land. Appellant cited a letter for this, it cited a letter from 2017 but has not provided any historic evidence in supporting that statement. The appellant also claims that amending subparagraph D of 1210 will address overdevelopment by eliminating the misuse of partial lot and will reduce DOB's burden of reducing zoning lot development agreement, easement, and restrictive deck to ensure that the floor area, open space, dwelling unit, parking, etc., are as shown in the filing set. With regards to the term block, appellant states that the definition of block in the zoning resolution supports the interpretation of the lot of record as tax lots, not the other way around. I just want to take excerpts from the zoning resolution in explaining how block has been used, the term block has been used. In the zoning resolution, the term block has been used as simple as block per tax map, as in section 11-151, special requirements for properties in the borough of Queens, where it specifically calls out block number 9898. And the term, in this case, the block, in 11-51 is not the defined term as in section 1210, where a block is a tract of land bounded by streets or public park or railroad right-of-ways, airport boundaries, pierhead lines, or corporate boundary lines. And the application of this defined term block is seen in example, for example, in the predominantly built-up area, where a predominantly built-up area is, as defined term block, entirely within R4 or R5 district, including a commercial district mapped within such residential districts. By this definition, it means that it requires a review of the block that is bounded by street or public park or railroad right-of-way, etc., as per the 1210 definition of block located entirely within R4 or R5. Whereas in through block arcade, the zoning resolution is using the block not as a defined term. When applying it as a through block arcade, it is definitely not referring to the city tax block or not to the 1210 definition. So based on these evidence from the zoning resolution, it definitely does not support that block in its usage in the zoning resolution supports the interpretation that lot of record are tax lots. DOB responded by stating that lot of record only refers to complete tax lots, and that although not a direct definition, the zoning resolution is helping explain the term lot of record by saying that it is a lot which other documents must be recorded against, while other private documents such as deeds, mortgages, and private development agreements are recorded. Tax lots are the only types of lot against which a declaration can be recorded. Section 12D reads as follows, and that it states, after it says a tract of land, either some unsubdivided, says, such declaration shall be made in one written declaration of restriction covering all of such tract of land, or in separate written declarations of restrictions covering parts of such tract of land. Note, the reference made to parts of such tract of land indicates that the drafters recognize that the part of land under different ownership could make a zoning lot. And it further goes to say, and which in aggregate cover the entire tract of land comprising the zoning lot. Any declaration of restrictions or declarations of restrictions which individually or collectively cover a tract of land are referred to herein as declarations. Each declaration shall be executed by each party in interest or defined herein in the portion of such tract of land. Not, in this case, they are not using the term lot of record. Tract of land is being used. Covered by such declaration. I'm not going to go into the detail of everybody's aware of the definition of 1210D. Restrictive declarations or easements are always recorded against the affected zoning lot as defined by 1210 definition. Zoning lot consists of tracts of land or lot of records, which in many cases include tax lots, full or partial. Typically, restrictive declaration is recorded against a tax lot similar to, such as the environmental restrictive declaration, where the area recorded in connection to the zoning action is recorded in connection to a zoning action against a noted tax block or lot. And just to note, in this case, the environmental restrictive declaration, the Appendix C, Table 2, Section 1112 of the zoning resolution and other sections, the text does not then use the term lot of record instead of tax lot, if one assumes that the two terms are interchangeable. The Minkin Memo Exhibit 2 for 1210D requires for certification to provide the names, address, lots, or lots affected, followed by a full meets and bounds description and diagrams showing the distance from corner block and lots, numbers and dimensions of each lot located within the subject tract of land, and that this zoning lot description and ownership statement as described is, quote, recorded in the record book at page and certified. And my understanding is that the record book in this case includes deeds, leases, letters, easements. Owner's rep states more reasonable meaning of a lot of record is either one, its historic and common meaning as a tax lot, if located in New York City, has been recorded in the office of the city register, or two, as a lot shown in DOB's record as available for development or already developed. Owner supported its statement by providing definition from other jurisdictions regarding lot of record. What could be gathered from these samples is that there was not one consistent definition for lot of record, apart from the common element that whatever the lot of record is, meets and bounds, lot, parcel, subdivision plat, lot established by plat, survey, record, or deed has to be recorded. The appellant has not referred us to any authorities as to the technical or exact meaning of the word lots. Based on our examination and documentations provided by the owner's rep, I am of the opinion that there is no fixed set of rules which gives this word an exact meaning. It should be read and interpreted in connection with the context and the circumstances under which it is used. So here are my conclusions based on what has been provided so far. And that is, first of all, the appellant claims that the zoning lot has been used interchangeably with lot of record. I'm going to use the historical report, which has been acknowledged by the appellant by quoting a Valletta memo that the definition as it existed in the Ballard Plan and the 1959 Voorhees report was considered by the drafters of the Ballard and the Voorhees report to be a sufficient basis on which the zoning bulk system could rest. The appellant states that the Valletta memo was not part of the legislative history of the zoning resolution, which is correct. However, it was widely circulated memorandum and by other city agencies with zoning expertise, and like the interpretations and practices of DOB, it is appropriate for the board to consider the Valletta memo insofar as it is relevant to the specific zoning provisions at issue. The board's task in its appeal, though, is just that, the interpretation of the zoning resolution. So based on the documents submitted and the historic reports regarding the 1961 zoning resolution, it is well established that two reports by Voorhees and Walker and Harrison Ballard set the ground for the 1961 comprehensive zoning text, where the definition of the zoning lot was introduced and that both reports were similar in their definition and purpose. Specifically, both reports identified a physical construct of a zoning lot, where a zoning lot is a single tract of land within a single block, which at the time of, and this I'm quoting Harrison Ballard, which at the time of filing for a building permit is designated by its owner or developers as a tract of land be used, developed, or built upon as a unit under single ownership or control. A zoning lot may be subsequently divided into two or more zoning lots subject to provisions of section 713 below. A zoning lot therefore may or may not coincide with a lot as shown in the official tax map of the City of New York or any recorded subdivision plat or deed. And I found that last part interesting, where it said that the tax map, it may not have to coincide also with recorded subdivisions plat or deed. The purpose of defining the physical construct of the zoning lot was to ensure that all zoning lots had to conform to the bulk regulations of the underlying zoning district. For example, in the Harrison Ballard report, it states in discussing a one-family detached home that spacing controls for several one-family detached residences building in one zoning lot provides increased flexibility for the designer while maintaining the protection to the residents afforded by these districts. It solely viewed a zoning lot as a tool for planning, not for real estate taxation. So zoning lot is a planning tool regulated by the zoning resolution, where it shapes the zoning lot, the development or developments on it, by regulating the size and the shape of the building or buildings, their locations in relation to each other and lot lines. Whereas a tax lot is another tool used by the city for recordation of taxes, assessment, ownership purposes. It is recorded for transaction and its tax implication. Board, in many of the GCL cases and in some recent ones, we have approved subdivisions and developments where a zoning requirement of a single family home is being met on the zoning lot and not necessarily on a single tax lot. Why is this information relevant to this case? Because zoning regulations applies to a zoning lot. A zoning lot may consist of multiple lots and also partial lots. The requirement of bulk, floor area, open spaces, parking requirements are not to be met on the zoning lot, provided that total development on the zoning lot meet the requirements. Zoning resolution allows for shifting of floor area within the zoning lot, provided it meets the underlying regulations of the zoning district. So maybe one could say a lot of record terminology may have been considered maybe an amalgam of two, whereby it ensured a method of recording the physical boundaries of the zoning lot on which the development occurs, and that zoning lot may or may not coincide with tax lot as in the city tax map. Use the meets and bounds to define the exact boundaries of the zoning lot, with partial lots and full lots described and displayed and recorded against all affected lots as evident in the Minkin memo. Per Minkin memo, Exhibit 2, that is applicable for 1210D zoning lot, on the subject, with regards to the subject case. The requirement for certifications are to provide the names, addresses, lot or lots affected, followed by a full meets and bounds description and diagram showing distance from the corner block and lots, numbers and dimensions of each lot located within the subject tractor plan. The certification document also has a note stating that a zoning lot may or may not coincide with the lot as shown on the official tax map of the City of New York or on any recorded subdivision plot or deed. A zoning lot may be subdivided into 2 or more zoning lots, provided all the resulting zoning lots and all the buildings thereon shall comply with applicable provisions of the zoning lot resolution. Zoning resolution. Through these sets of documentations, DOB ensures that A, physical boundaries of the development parcels on which all applicable zoning regulations would be applied is in compliance with the zoning resolution. B, each property owner is fully aware of the portion of its tax lot that is being utilized for a development. C, DOF is notified by referring to the affected tax lot, full or partial, to address the taxes with regards to tax assessments, ownership, and other legal purposes. Please note that the submission requirement per Minkin memo is consistent with 1210C definition of a zoning lot. So reviewing meets and bounds and exhibits mentioned in the Minkin memo, including a certificate for the title insurance company, declaration of restriction, and zoning lot description and ownership statement, which are directly mentioned in the 1210 zoning lot definition, is not an alien concept to DOB and is part of its regular administrative procedure. As a comparison, board, as I've mentioned, that we have determined as a comparison, the board has determined that part of a tax lot was a zoning lot before. The board considered an individually designated plot of land within Breezy Point Cooperative, a 403 acres privately owned community comprised of 2,834 separate residential plots leased to individual shareholders, properties, proprietary tenants under BSA calendar number 229-06A. Relevant to this appeal, the board determined that the individually designated plot in that appeal complied with the 1210A definition of the zoning lot because it was a lot of record existing on December 15, 1961. Notably, for the purpose of this appeal, reviewing the tax map, it appears that the site located at 607 Bayside Drive, block 16350, was only part of a tax lot 300. Accordingly, in the past, the board has considered tracts of land that are only parts of tax lots to be considered zoning lot. Now, what will be the outcome if you were to take the appellant's interpretation? So taking the construct of the zoning lot definition as per the appellant, if a lot of record is equal to one tax lot, then in 1210D, it is either many lots of records or an unsubdivided tract of land, which is equal to a single lot of record. Why then use the tract of land in subsection B, C, or D? Zoning lot could have been kept much simpler. Therefore, the zoning lot text amendment would read, if one were to take lot of record is equal to tax lot, it could read as A remains the same, B would change to, instead of a tract of land, it would be a lot of record or consisting of two or more. And C also, all of these would change. And D would read as a lot of record or consisting of two or more lots of records contiguous for a minimum of 10 linear feet, except the only difference between the C and D is the ownership issue. This leads me to believe that even if lot of records were to be tax lot, that there are other ways of accounting or recording a zoning lot, and that the purpose of using the term tract of land, drafters intended it to provide flexibility and thus be different from a lot of record. Another thing to note is that both subsections C and D require when there are 2 or more lots of record to be contiguous for a minimum of 10 linear feet. The intent was to allow for floor area to be allocated on the zoning lot in a flexible manner in a zoning lot under single ownership or a zoning lot under multiple ownerships. This also affirms my earlier statement that zoning lot definition by refraining from using tax lot and instead using tract of land, the drafters were ensuring flexibility in creating a development parcel to form a zoning lot, provided all developments within the zoning lot was compliant. Again, as I've said, in many of our GCL cases, board has often reviewed developments with one zoning lot that are developed with individual homes and are condoed like townhouses, or a zoning lot subdivided into more than one zoning lots where one may consist of 2 or more tax lots and other may not, an unsubdivided tract of land. In such instances, DOB ensures that the zoning lot is compliant. In many instances, easements are drawn for common purposes like driveways, open space, and in such situations, the easements straddle multiple tax lots and zoning lots and are recorded against the zoning lot and tax lots. So shared driveways, easements, for example, for instance, frequently only span part of a tax lot and the tract of land, because they are still recorded against the entire tax lots and because recording is done by tax lot number. While tax lot is one of the tools and more common tool used for recordation purposes, it has not been clearly established that a lot of record is same as tax lot. If, as the appellant claims, amending subpara D of 1210 will address overdevelopment by eliminating the misuse of partial tax lot, it should be noted that when 1210D was included as the 4th alternative definition of the zoning lot in 1977, City Planning Commission's objective was to prevent overdevelopment or prevent double dipping into the same parcels of land towards generating floor area for more than one zoning lot for sites where parties in interest had interest in different parts of land delineated by zoning lot. It has not been established by the appellant or DOB that there has been an abuse of partial lot, tax lot. While there might be administrative challenges for DOB to track zoning lot boundaries, today's amazing computer programs and other technologies can be a way of mitigating that. As a comparison, the Department of Finance has recently created a 3D tax map to visualize air lots, which are tax lots above the ground floating in airspace. On the other hand, zoning lots are tracts of land that could be visualized and tracked on a standard 2D map. Also, I'm not aware that DOB is concerned about Department of Finance's knowing what a zoning lot is. DOB is concerned about DOB and its public knowing what a zoning lot is. And Zoning Resolution 1210D was designed to alert the owners about the ownership rights to their property, and that is the part of the zoning lot, and that is a part of a zoning lot. It is also not clear to me the reason behind the draft bulletin. Administrative changes or zoning interpretation? Which one is guiding the draft bulletin? If it is the latter, it is a significant departure and may affect many other zoning laws that cannot be confirmed by DOB. Also, I want to point out that it's DOB's practice to prepare draft bulletins to get comments internally or within limited external review. However, that does not mean that the draft bulletin is in effect, as supported by the statement made by the DOB General Counsel, Sehgal, and at the March hearing, that is, new interpretations once finalized depends on the outcome of its case. We'd be making a determination. It's a significant change, and we want to make sure that the proper process is undertaken. So a draft bulletin may not see the light of day. Revoking a permit should not be based on the draft bulletin. Revocation would only be proper when the permit was erroneously issued based on failure to comply with the zoning resolution. So that's my conclusion of the first question.
Well, it kind of seems like you've added quite a few kind of interpretations to that first one. I thought we were just sticking with whether or not lots of record referred to tax lots or something else, but I think you've gone quite a bit further than that, because you're also talking about whether or not the policy as a whole should be revoked, whether it should be changed, whether it should be prospective or retrospective. So you've involved a lot of other issues other than the issue that we were supposed to be discussing first. I thought we were going to do it systematically. So that being said, I'm just going to stick with the one question that was presented initially, which is, we wanted to have more information as to what lot of record was referring to.
Okay.
And I, having read all of the papers, and thank you very much, because it was great to have a lot of different points of view about it. However, I have not changed my opinion thus far as to whether or not lots of record referred to something other than tax lot. I think that the appellant lays out a good explanation supporting the fact that lot of record could only be referring to tax lot. And when I looked at the owner's papers that were put in, I found that it actually, even though they came to a different conclusion, their historical presentation of both other jurisdictions as well as the history of zoning within New York City suggests that lots of record really could only refer to tax lots, because there was no other formal record in 1961 for any kind of land use records. So I'm convinced at the end of that lots of record referred to tax lots. Right?
Okay, I did read the documents presented by the owner and by the appellant and by the DOB, and I did look at the zoning resolution as well, and I did read the definition for the zoning lot, and I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, the definition of the zoning lot, and the second one, is there an equivalency between a tax lot and a lot of record? I used to read engineering codes, and what I read in engineering codes, I used to take it as is. So let's say if I read term A in one of the engineering codes and it says the definition of term A is this, and then it use another term like term B, and which in my opinion they are the same, I am at the opinion that I still keep difference between A and B, because they were used in two different situations in that code, so I wouldn't like mix them together. So because in the zoning resolution, I'm new to the use of the zoning resolution. In the zoning resolution, I saw that the two terms, lot of record and tax lot, were used. So I would say, because the people who wrote that zoning resolution are experts, if their intent was that they are equal, they should have mentioned that in the zoning resolution, which didn't happen. So I would say that they are different. It should be some sort of difference between them. The second point is the definition of the zoning lot, and whether a zoning lot could include parts of tax lots or not. I did read the definition like 5 times, and it caught my eye. Part D of the definition, the paragraph before the final, where it says a zoning lot therefore may or may not coincide with a lot as shown on the official tax map, which means it may not coincide with the perimeter or the limits of a tax lot. Someone may argue that yes, if this is restricted to the case that when the zoning lot include more than one tax lot, it could coincide with some of the perimeter and not the other. I would say if this was intended, again, it should have been made crystal clear in the zoning resolution that a zoning lot should not include parts of tax lot. So I believe, based on that interpretation, and based on some other cases that were presented in the documentation by the owner, I am at the opinion that a zoning lot may include parts of tax lot too.
Thank you. Commissioner Shabbat.
I don't want to repeat what was said by Vice Chair and Commissioner, but I did remain unsatisfied with the information regarding how many other partial lots are in the city. I've only gotten a few from the owner, but I didn't see any more than that. And I'd like to know how consistent this has been through the last 40 years.
DOB in its statement has indicated that they do not have a database through which they can determine how many, so.
While I understand, I still remain unsatisfied with that.
They actually said it is not a feasible task. That's what I read in the DOB papers that
Right.
presented to us. But I believe the owner presented more than 10
Yeah, I
cases
think
where zoning lots included parts of tax lots, not just few.
There are about
33
33
cases.
out of
Yeah.
about 1,700 that are said to have occurred in the past 40 years, according to the appellant. So there is a very small amount of actual zoning lots that are known to be comprised of partial tax lots.
Again,
And I just wanted to say, and the reason why DOB says it's infeasible is because they do not have a unit-based, a discrete unit-based record that one can use to kind of sort
Yeah,
and
I
pull that
understand.
out. So
Yes.
that's
They-
basically
They said they would
what
do
they're
this
saying.
manually, which is gonna take probably too much
It's,
time to do.
DOB
it.
lacks
Yes,
the
understood.
administrative and the technical know-how to, I guess, keep these data and collect the data and do data search. But I would respectfully disagree with Commissioner Otley Brown as to the numbers, because this is a number that is presented by the owner, 33, that's what they know. We don't know the unknowns. So there could be many, there could be few, but we don't know. And that, the only agency I think that can tell us that, and that is DOB.
And they can't tell us that.
They can't tell us
because
that-
it's impossible to monitor a
Right,
situation.
and that's not the case, but I think that's not a case before. That's for DOB to fix its in-house issues. And
Right, which they are doing by creating this new draft bulletin that will make
So-
it more easy for them to actually manage and administer the policy going forward.
so you're saying that the whole purpose of this draft bulletin is an administrative policy procedure, and not necessarily an interpretational,
No, it's definitely based on interpretation.
but the okay,
It's
definitely
based on an interpretation that, a new interpretation or a different interpretation. Whether or not it's correcting an incorrect interpretation is what remains to be argued out by both the appellant and the owners and DOB. But it's a different interpretation than the prior interpretation.
And what's before us is the interpretation
Is
based on
the
which-
current
is the current interpretation that is
interpretation.
before us. And so I think we have all stated our position as to what we believe on the current interpretation is. And with that, should I move to the second one?
Well, it's kind of like you kind of covered all of the
Yeah, I
other
would say
ones
that.
when you spoke, because all the other ones flow from that.
It
The
is-
question is the current interpretation valid or not? We have all spoken. Then the next step is, if it is valid, don't go any further. If it is invalid, should the corrected interpretation or the new interpretation be applied prospectively or retrospectively and prospectively? And then that's an issue now that's open for discussion.
Right.
So, but you sort of covered that already. And so, what now you have to talk about is the second question
Right.
and talk about the different positions on whether or not it's fair to apply it retrospectively.
Well, the way I mean, DOB has said, and I think this was one of the questions that was raised, as to the,
Actually,
I'm just
sorry,
gonna-
if we could just go back, Commissioner, that I don't know that you actually said your position on whether the lots of record are.
At this point, I feel that, especially considering D of the zoning code, if it states pretty specifically that it's not confined to a tax lot, I'd like to see, like I stated earlier, I'd like to see the history behind this, and if there are more cases than just the ones that the owner provided,
You're not going to get that.
I understand.
Everybody has conceded
Yeah.
that those 33 are the universe at this point in time. And there's no way that they're going to be able to now dig up another 100 unless we want to keep them here for another 5 years.
Which I think becomes part of a question, more of a concern in the second question here. If this is something that has a global reach, I think it goes retroactively, that would create quite a concern for an unknown amount of access.
But just to clarify, the first question is whether or not lots of record are tax lots. The policy implications of that decision is a secondary consideration, right? We're here to determine
Yes.
whether or not DOB's determination in issuing these permits was a valid interpretation of the zoning resolution. If you think it's not, then
I think it is.
It is or it is not?
It is a valid interpretation,
Of the not using the tax lot.
not using the tax law.
So you believe the current zoning resolution as it stands, or as the Minkin memo stands, is the correct interpretation or should be revised?
I believe it's the correct interpretation.
So, sorry, if you wanted to move on. Just wanted to get that in the record.
No, I think just to go back to the fact, we've been talking about number of lots and other things, and the appellant had given a number. Now, in its statement, the appellant stated that the reason there is such a low percentage of usage of the tax lot, it's because DOB has been consistent in its practice of only allowing the merging of full tax lots and and not partial tax lot. To me, I think that's a very big leap of assumption, because DOB is not the agency that that creates or divides a tax lot. It's the owner that takes the property parcel to DOB, showing one tax lot, many tax lots, parts of tax lots, and then DOB reviews that zoning lot to make sure that the development that is going to be situated within that zoning lot is going to be consistent, and that the ownership properties, all of that has been made aware, and that whatever the ownership of those partial lots are is consistent as in the declaration and the deed, and based on that, the zoning lot boundaries are being drawn. So I just think that was a very unfair statement of the appellant to state that, and the reason for such limited number of cases, it's, I think it's very speculative at this point. We don't know the total number. It's just speculating why it's low, why it's high. Is it high? We don't know, but it's speculative at this point. So we just need to go by what we know so far and use the zoning lot definition for interpretation, not past practices and other things.
Well, I think the whole question of how many cases have been presented with part of tax lots is used, number one, by the appellant when they examined it to show that out of the whole field, the total number of projects involving zoning lots that were comprised of partial tax lots, many of them had to deal with this one project or set of projects on this superblock, and a lot of the rest of them cited partial tax lots, but those partial tax lots were temporary. Temporary in that Department of Finance had not yet completed the apportionment, giving them discrete tax lot numbers. So I think that on the appellant side, that's how they used the argument about these 33 or 15 original cases that came up. Whereas the owner is using it as an example of how DOB has consistently applied its current definition in determining whether or not a zoning lot has been properly formed. So I just want that to be a part of the record, because it should be considered. These are, because it's got to be considered in furtherance of both arguments. And so that's why I think it's valid to talk about that.
Commissioner Brown, my question would be, would the DOB know that the Department of Finance, that these were temporary tax lots? Would be my question. I understand at the time, I don't know if they
I honestly, that would be a question for DOB. I don't know what DOB requires when they're reviewing the zoning lot mergers, whether or not they're requiring the forms from Department of Finance to be included. That I don't know.
I think that'd be very pertinent information.
Just to know that this partial tax lot can be under single ownership. And, so, I know we are getting bogged down with the fact that this is under multiple ownership, but you could have partial tax lots under single ownership that meets the definition of 1210C, where also I would think the DOB would want to make sure that the same owner could be using a portion of the same tax lot for development A, could be using portion of the same portion of the remaining portion of the tax lot for development B. And I don't see the difference between C and D other than the fact there is an ownership issue. C is one ownership, D is multiple ownerships. Nobody has raised an issue with the C, and that's not before us. But what I'm saying is that this is not, the partial tax lot concept is not an alien concept. Whether in this case it's under multiple ownership or it's single ownership is a different matter. It's the only difference here.
I'm not quite getting the conversation. I'm sorry. I'm not understanding this part of the conversation. I'm trying to follow along. I really am. I'm just getting a little turned around with a lot of the stuff that you're saying, because it seems to me that there are a few very simple issues here, and I'm getting lost in your discussion of them. I'm sorry. To me, the simple issues, zoning lot, what do they mean by lot of record? 2, if this interpretation needs to be changed, should it be prospective or retroactive and prospective? 3, open space. Has open space been properly determined? Yes or no? And then 4, the legality of the parking of 170's parking spots on the rear yard of 200 Amsterdam. And those are the 4 issues. Okay. So I'm getting confused.
Why don't we move on to number 3, because we've covered 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So 3 is open space.
Okay, thank you for keeping track.
Thank you thank you to Commissioner Ellie Brown.
Okay. So with regards to the open space, DOB has stated that the developer has demonstrated open space on the subject zoning lot, and it complies with the zoning resolution, and that the open space provided is open and accessible. Appellant, in its submission regarding the lack of compliance with all applicable open space requirements, specifically with regards to an undefined term, accessible and usable, agrees that the phrase is not defined in the zoning resolution. However, the appellant further states that though the term accessible and usable is not a defined term for the specific zoning district, in the absence of a definition, we should consider the statute, and that we should look to for determining the meaning to large scales and special districts. Based on that read, appellant states that in aggregate it becomes clear that usable means open space that provides a range of active and passive recreational facilities, activities, and landscaping. So with regards to accessible and usable, open space is clearly, it's a defined term. We do not need to look beyond the definition, even though the definition is somewhat ambiguous, and the board has opined on it. Secondly, as we all know, the purpose of the zoning districts, special purpose districts or large-scale developments are different. Special purpose districts are overlaid on the zoning district, which in this case, it isn't. It's just a zoning lot zoned R10 with a C25 commercial overlay along certain street frontages. Zoning resolution has been quite clear about it, and that zoning resolution, along with zoning districts, uses special purpose district as a tool. As described in the DCP website, special purpose district is a complementary tool that have been used, added over time to address specific types of development or the design and quality of public spaces to respond to distinctive neighborhoods, issues, and goals. So if we were to look to other sections of the zoning resolution to determine a meaning as deemed appropriate for a specific development, we would be misapplying the zoning resolution. For instance, the definition section is generally applicable and more specific provisions are provided elsewhere in the zoning resolution. So, so with regards to the parking in the open space, board has considered this, board's consideration is based on an approved plan, which shows it is an open space and that it is complying with the requirements of the permitted obstruction in the open space as per zoning resolution. Owner of 200 Amsterdam has stated that even without that area being used for parking, the development would meet the open space requirement and has been affirmed by DOB. Based on the plans and the open space analysis provided, board believes that I believe, I'm not going to say board, sorry. I believe that the subject zoning lot complies with all applicable open space requirement as indicated on the approved plan, and any further modification to the requirement that would be required to the open space calculation would be determined by DOB. The issue of the space being used as a parking space for 170 West End Avenue is a private agreement between 200 Amsterdam and 170 West End Avenue. And 170 West End Avenue has submitted its construction plans and zoning analysis to DOB for consideration regarding legality of the parking space. If the DOB considers it and takes necessary action to correct the CO for 170 and 200, plans would be revised accordingly and if needed. And that's not something that is before us. So we are just reviewing the plan as has been provided by DOB. I know I mixed the open space and the parking together, but they kind of go hand in hand because it's all related to open space. So I just wanted to take everybody's feedback on that.
So I'm not convinced by the appellant's argument that this project is not meeting the requirements of open space as defined in 1210 definition of open space. That is basic, it's to me a very bare bones definition, unobstructed from its lowest level to the sky and is accessible to and usable. This definition doesn't say anything about quality of open space, what it needs to be used for, and so therefore any argument that this is not quality open space because it can't be used to play a game of ball on with your children or your dog, I don't find very relevant to this, and so therefore I agree with both DOB and the owner that the proper amount of open space as presented on the plans thus far seems to be appropriate for meeting the minimum required open space on the zoning lot.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Brown in that. I believe the requirements for the open space are met. And for me, usable and accessible, not usable and accessible. If somebody can walk to the parking lot, this is accessible. And if somebody can park, if one of the occupants can park his car in that parking lot, this is usable. So I believe, and I did look at the plans like very rough, and I believe the area for the parking lot with, if compared to the entire open space, is less than 50%. So I believe it meets the requirements for the zoning resolution.
I further agree with.
Okay. And then with regards to parking?
Yeah, and with regards to the parking, the question that was raised.
As to what, my feeling about the parking is that, a parking agreement could be created. I agree that would ensure that the owners of 170 Amsterdam have access to the parking in the rear yard.
200 Amsterdam?
200.
200.
You mean the 170 West End Avenue?
170 West End Avenue is
okay.
what I meant to
Yeah,
say,
sure.
behind there. And so if DOB originally signed off that the parking was legitimate, then I feel that it should be up to the owners of both properties to resolve the issue should the legality of those parking spots come to the fore again at a future date. I think it probably could be handled and through some sort of personal private agreement and does not need to jeopardize the building permit.
Okay.
I don't want to be dragged into the issue of the legitimacy of the parking. I believe what we're looking at is the open space and whether it was provided for the 200 Amsterdam, whether it was compliant or not, and I believe I covered this already, so I don't want to talk about parking.
Okay. And Commissioner Shibata, do you have any additional comments on that?
I agree with Commissioner Otley Brown. Like, if there is an agreement between the owners, that would probably be best suited for this case.
That's it,
Yep,
right?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
We are done.
I just, actually, there's just one question I had, and that is, I think, this was a question with regards to the zoning law that is being, it's 1210D definition, and DOB has stated that it is subject to the zoning law because it consists, 12D, because it consists of 2 or more tax lots, and since it contains multiple tax lots, and it cannot be formed as an unsubdivided tract of land. I just want the owner to confirm how the subject zoning lot is a tract of land. Is it unsubdivided or consisting of lots of records? I'm assuming it's I just want to hear it from them because appellant had asked that question, and I just want that to be clear for our purposes. Okay.
Okay, I'll go get the chair. Oh, thank you. Okay. Yep.
Item number 5, 78945 BZ, 560220 Broadway, Queens.
Okay, we have fire department sign off. Photos were submitted showing the fence and wall repaired. Looks much better. The light spread diagram shows high lighting levels along a property line that's shared with residential neighbors. There's a note on the drawing stating there's a 10-foot range onto adjacent property permitted. I don't actually know where that comes from, but it's supposed to be 0 at the property line. So they need to provide the shielding, and they need to do it now. The community board actually had the same concern, that was canopy lighting shall be directed down and away from residential property, so they must have had testimony about that. Anybody else?
No.
No?
Item number 6, 41850 BZ, 7369 217th Street, 7336 Springfield Boulevard, 21902 74th Avenue, 7310 220th Street, please.
Okay, so this is a compliance hearing, and I understand that council was changed from the last hearing, but we received nothing other than owner's authorization for new counsel, but we received no submission at all from the property owner's representative, other than the proof of owner's authorization for the new representative to appear on their behalf. No, those were as far as I can tell. Well, there was a submission that was in air, right? But I didn't see any submission from the property owner saying we are taking care of this stuff. Instead, there were photographs. So sometimes there were photographs provided by occupants of the property who are upset about certain things, and then there were lots of submissions from neighbors, and actually what's kind of confusing about this is the neighbors wanted the area cleaned out. They didn't want dumping on the site, so we instructed the property owner to clean out the area and install fencing so you couldn't have dumping on the site. Now the people are complaining that the clean out sort of denudes the forest. Well, naturally, that's what happens first, and then nature takes back, right? And if you put fencing, then it prevents dumping, and some neighbors are saying, or people are saying, wait a second, that they don't want fencing because the fencing, whatever, obstructs the view or something. So it's kind of, we can't have it all, right? So something has to happen. So when you see something from WOTC, it needs to be something that's from the attorneys that say, we represent, this is what we've done to date. When did they submit that? No, they submitted something. Did you see them say anything more than we are the attorneys?
No, yeah, they submitted to, sorry? It was submitted May 31st. It was sent to submit, myself and CC and Goydell, so this is from...
CC and Goydell is the lawyer.
Right, he represents.
Yes, that's the lawyer. So that's the thing that's confusing. WOTC are property, are residents of the property in question, but they're not the owners of the property. May 30th. Oh, I did not see this, so I'll read it. But I don't know if there's anything, was there anything attached?
Yeah, there was a bunch of other.
Okay, so on May 30th, I didn't see this. This letter is part of the applicant's submission of a status concerning the buffer zone. As depicted on the annexed 7 photographs, green turf landscaping has completed approximately 90% of the cleanup of the buffer zone. Some additional debris needs to be removed by hand and not machinery. Once the cleanup is completed, the applicant was going to evaluate the vegetation, some of which is growing in now, and make a determination as to what plantings were necessary and where. In order to address the concerns of neighbors on 77th Avenue, it was the intention of the apartment corporation to place shrubs on the southernmost portion of the buffer zone, which over time would grow and hopefully provide privacy. The applicant has secured proposals from 3 contractors to install fencing on the northernmost portion of the buffer zone. 2 of the proposals also include repairs to some damaged areas of fencing on the southern, eastern, and western portions of the buffer zone. However, until a determination is made as to required plantings, it makes little sense to have the fencing installed. Concerning garbage collection, the applicant's managing agent is attempting to identify another location approved by the Department of Sanitation as a suitable pickup zone. Okay, it is respectfully requested that the applicant be afforded an additional period of 3 months within which to address open items. Okay, I didn't...
Where is that? Because I don't see that
just-
at all on the board.
So,
Which, I just looked in every single
go
one
to
of
the,
them.
actually, this is true. I was looking for it and I just found out.
What is it under?
So if you look under, sorry, hold on, my apology. I looked for 418-50 BZ 53120. There are 3 separate folders.
Oh, it's not in all 3 folders?
Yeah, it's the first folder. It's 41850.
Yeah, it's okay. So anyway, but this was submitted on May 30th, and so
Yeah.
it wasn't in any of
So
the...
they submitted
Yeah,
lots.
but I saw
I have
tons of these
neighbors'
photos.
submissions,
Yeah.
so what
was
is this?
This was the letter.
Which is the date? It's showing up on May 31.
May 31, yeah.
Neighbors' submission?
No,
Because that's what I
But it
have.
says neighbors
It
submission.
says neighbors, which is what led me to think it was the opposition or neighbors.
people
you
who
know,
live there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that folder was
No,
created.
no, that's not it. No, it's not it.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
It has to have letterhead from the lawyer. So we need to get this into
We'll
a
recirculate
separate
it.
folder? Okay, so we didn't see it. That's not it. That's from neighbors.
That's what I thought.
Right, so that was the thing, so, you know, so I think it's really good that the owners are pursuing these things. You know, the neighbors are asking us to do 2 things, like opposing things at the same time. Clean it up, don't clean it up. put fencing, don't put fencing. So there has to be neighbors have to be reasonable about how we address this. When you clean out a forest, naturally, initially, it opens up the spaces and reveals the trunks of the trees. What do you know, right? But in the process, it removes the vines that are killing the trees. It does all this good stuff. And eventually, it grows back in naturally, and then they're also going to be planting shrubs along the border. So I think everybody will get what they need, so. Okay. That's not it either. No, it has to have the.
No, it does not.
Whatever the law firm's name is on it. Okay. Anybody else have comments on this? Okay. So they submitted.
Item number 7, 540-84BZ, 341 Soundview Avenue, Bronx.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Soundview. No, Soundview. Oh, I'm sorry, I passed it. Okay. So we have a May 30th fire department letter requiring action, but actually they requested an adjournment, but I want to draw their attention to the fire department action. Fire department says, our records indicate that the above noted automotive repair shop has one outstanding violation order issued by the department. The violation order E417146 was issued to Class On Point Collision, Inc. at the above noted premises. The violation order was issued for failure to obtain approval for the paint spray booth. That's pretty significant. The remedy to cure this violation order is for the occupant to provide Department of Buildings approved design and installation documents and obtain a permit from the fire department for flammable finishing operations. Once the fire department receives such documents, the department will dismiss the violation order and issue a letter of no objection for this application. So in addition to other things that we've requested, this must be done before we can come to a decision, because a spray booth is an enormous polluter, and if it's not a properly ventilated or protected spray booth, then that's a danger to the community.
This is a gas station?
Yeah.
The service station.
It's a
Service station.
There are two, one is in
Service.
There are two uses.
So they may be doing that depends on what they're doing, right? If it's not allowed to have even a spray booth, that's a whole other subject. So I actually don't have the details on what it was granted in front of me.
It was
Accessory repair.
20 years variance to permit a development one-story use group 16 custom cabinet shop, and then it was amended to an auto repair shop, use group 16B to permit minor interior alteration.
So it doesn't sound like a spray booth is relevant unless they're doing something very minor, like little touch-ups or something like that. But how do you do little touch-ups in a spray booth? You have to take the piece off the car, right? Otherwise, it's a drive-in spray booth. Then it's...
You put the whole car in the spray booth and then you spray it.
No, that's when you've got a body shop, right? This is not a body shop. This would be a little scratch or something, and there's a spray booth that's small enough not to drive a car in, which makes it a body shop, would mean taking the fender off the car and putting it in the little tiny closet that is just to protect the workers. It's not a bad idea to actually have those things, even if you're just using a little can of paint. But, yeah, so they may have, right, okay, so more to talk about.
But they requested an adjournment.
They requested an adjournment, but they should be aware that they don't have permission to operate a body shop.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Okay.
Item number 8, 3191BC, 173 Kingsland Avenue, Brooklyn.
They also requested an adjournment, but the fire department also issued a letter requiring action. So it says, a review of Department of Buildings records shows a post-approval amendment and approved on July 18th, 2017. The fire department permit is based on this application. A second public assembly application has been filed under the address 173 Kingsland Avenue for the same space and shows 174 persons for the public assembly. And the last action by DOB was that the applicant was disapproved on May 14th, 2013. We request that the applicant clarify which application they intend to maintain their PA permit under, and if they intend to withdraw the application, that will no longer be applicable for these premises. In addition, the plans submitted to the board show an exit passageway through the kitchen. While no line diagram is showing the exit passageway, the plans show a 3-light exit sign over the door leading to the kitchen. This is not acceptable under the building code. We request that the applicant clarify the exit passageway as well. So all of that has to be done for the next hearing. Okay.
New cases, item number 9, 44131 BZ, 7702 Flatlands Avenue, Brooklyn.
Mic is off, shoot.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval. I actually found the statement about the compliance certification pretty confusing, because it says basically that the only thing missing is the C of O, but in fact, and the statement of facts as well, but in fact, they don't mention the absence of planters that were supposed to be located along the east and south side lot lines that are shown on the 2009 approved drawings, and the fact that the 60 by 30 building was supposed to have been pulled away from the eastern side lot line by 8 feet, leaving 52 feet clear on the western side of the lot. Instead, the existing and proposed plans show the building built 2 feet from the eastern lot line with 58 feet from the western lot line. I'm not sure if there was anything that the board expected by that 8-foot pull-away, or if that's part of being in compliance with side yard regulations, because 2 feet would never be in compliance, even though this is not a use for which there's a bulk requirement, since it's not a permitted use in the district. But the building is built much closer to the lot than expected. Photos submitted with the application in October are of the wrong site. There's a dumpster enclosure there's a dumpster that needs to have an enclosure, and it needs to be shown on the plans. And we need an update on the status of the DEC's review of the proposed groundwater monitoring project, monitoring protocol. The last update was in January for a spill that was just opened recently, discovered. Anybody else?
I had additional comments. There were a lot of banners. Those need to be removed. I'm suddenly beginning to notice this. The height of that freestanding ID sign seems to be much higher than shown in the plan. The plan shows it as 19 feet 4 inches, especially when the height is compared to the height of the canopy, which is 18 feet. So if you look at the photograph, it is way over the canopy, so it is definitely not 19 feet 4 inches. And they need to revise the plan to show the landscaping on the northern lot line, as you picked up. And the plan also shows there are 2 existing street trees on 77th Street, which is not there. So based on the photos.
Plant the street tree or get them replaced. Okay.
Move on.
No, any other comment?
Yeah, I have a comment on the letter that was provided regarding the environmental remediation. In that letter, it says that groundwater monitoring would likely be required for a minimum of 2 quarters of sampling. I'm not sure what 2 quarters of sampling is. And then it proceeds to say, to verify contaminants concentrations in the groundwater are naturally attenuating and decreasing and do not pose a significant threat to human health or to the environment. No further action will be requested upon completion of the required groundwater monitoring. If there is a doubt right now and they need to verify that the concentrations of the contaminants in the groundwater will drop to a limit that would impose a threat I'm not sure if we can like extend the terms with the conditions, with unfavorable conditions. Let's say if they do the monitoring and the results come back like the remediation wasn't effective, it wasn't good enough, and we still have elevated contaminants ratios or results in the groundwater. Also, the extent of the cleanup, I didn't see it in any of the documents, that what is the extent of the cleanup. And we want to know if the project environmental engineer is okay with that extent. So.
Right. So my understanding is that the spill was discovered very recently, like in January, when they were replacing tanks. The tank installer reported the spill. That's required by law, right? So having reported the spill, now they have to initiate a protocol for monitoring, for groundwater monitoring that would be acceptable to DEP, or DEC, sorry. So, and that's what's going on. They submitted to DEC a pretty long time ago. I'm sorry, it was discovered in March of 2017. And it's now undergoing remediation. And in January, they submitted a monitoring well work plan in November to DEC, and they still haven't received approval or something. So we should be reaching out to DEC to find out what's going on with this. Is it DEC just hasn't gotten around to reviewing the protocol, or are there a lot of back and forths going on? The remediator sent us a letter telling us what the progress was, but we should get it. That's why I wanted an update, like what's been going on, what's the communications with DEC, why haven't you gotten an approval for the work plan, because now you have to do the work, right? So.
My point is that their environmental engineer is saying here that to make sure or to ensure that the contaminants figures will not pose significant threat to human health. This issue is still in doubt.
Correct.
If it is, I believe we should be careful, like moving forward with granting them the extension or having them like continue what they are doing on site without making sure that hearing from the environmental engineer that everything is okay, figures are fine, the results are okay, let's move forward.
Okay.
Yeah. Which means the remediation is effective.
Right, okay.
I just want to say, I'm not sure those plans are correct in that there was only a 2-foot distance between the building and the lot line. Because I was actually looking, because my recollection, I actually went to the site and I knew that there was a big gap between the building and the building next to it. And the photos actually show that gap. So they need to address that and possibly address the drawings.
Okay, great.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 10, 2017-103A, 3924 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay. The driveway declaration was, I thought, very nicely amended to include maintenance obligations on the part of the homeowners association and the homeowners. So I don't think there was anything outstanding.
Item number 11, 20515A through 21415A. This is Hook Creek Boulevard and Fortune Way in Queens.
They asked for an adjournment.
Yeah, they got a DEP issue still. Item number what? 12, sorry. 23815A through 24315A. This is Dunton Court in Queens.
So nothing was submitted on this, and the last hearing was in December, at which we had many unanswered questions, as far as my notes say. The March hearing was adjourned, so we actually haven't talked about this since December. So I don't really understand the intent of the applicant. You know, this has been going on for a long time. It's been going on for exactly 2 years, happy anniversary, but one reason is because the drawings didn't comply with zoning. So the applicant had to go back to DOB and make an argument about the size of the yards and all that sort of stuff. So some of that was because the project had to be redesigned. But we've been We've been asking them to clarify the ownership of Dunton Court, and the way that it's been attempted is the owner's rep has just said, I determined that we don't know who owns it, and therefore, and that's not how it's done. It's a title company that determines the ownership of a piece of property. And then the other thing is that we had said that the owner has to take responsibility for removing that little curb so that it behaves like a road. And we've gotten, there were other questions too, a lot, and we've gotten no submissions. So I'd like to know what the ownership's intent is on this project. And I would say that, you know, that we should be sending out a letter to council and to the owner that if they don't appear at the next hearing, having submitted responses to all of our questions from December, that I don't see why we should be continuing with this. So I just don't understand what's going on. It's been crickets since December. Have you heard anything else?
I thought there was the discussion about the HOA.
Right.
And so that was still sort of a little more, and then you and I discussed I think there was a letter from the borough president that said that they had no control over the street.
Right.
That's the same answer we've gotten from multiple agencies about
But
that.
what else do we,
Right,
what
but
else do
no,
we
no, no,
do?
so
But no, there was
But
just no submission from
There's
this
no
hearing.
submissions, and since December. So what are we supposed to do? We had a pile of questions. They said there is an existing, I'm just reading from the 12 notes. It says.
I don't go back and look.
On the day before, so it says, we're awaiting edits on the homeowners association agreement. A copy of the association agreement was provided, but it doesn't provide for maintenance of the roadway in compliance with DOT standards. They said there's an existing HOA across the street, but no one knows about it, and the lot to which it was pertinent was never built. That means it doesn't exist, because if there's nobody to be responsible for an HOA, that's the beauty of these HOAs. It's like, it's a non-entity, right? It also included a 36-page title report without cover page or summary, and basically giving us the job of figuring out who owns Dunton Court. And then it included a set of revised plans that, then it took care of, so the submission that was submitted late that we never considered in the September hearing, we considered in the December hearing, right? And that was the submission that shows now the yards complying with zoning.
Right.
Then the question was, they provided a wider street, 30-foot curb to curb, plus a 3-foot wide walkway. And I said a 3-foot wide walkway is probably not legal because it's not wide enough for wheelchairs. And they said they would clarify that, right? Didn't do that. Then it shows street trees on the lawns within the private lots. So we said, how does that work? And they said they don't have to provide a street tree on a street that isn't title vested.
Right.
But need to have an HOA agreement and deed restriction that runs with the individual properties to require them to maintain the trees. These are like all these things where then they have these dash lines on the site plans that are neither zoning lot nor tax lot lines. We asked them to clarify what that is or take them off, wherever. Let's say, so then the elevations are shown in Queens Datum and NGVD when it's
Right, which
been
they had to correct.
years since we've had to speak in NAVD 88. The developer of this new site has to eliminate the curb obstructing the access to Dunton Court. Clarify on the site plan that 102nd Street adjacent to the site is unopened and unimproved. They keep showing it as an actual roadway. And then, since then, we received only a letter from council concerning the status of Dunton Court, and that's the same comment I had before. It's not the subject of a corp council nor opinion, nor do we have ownership information on it. But for the council itself to say, we've researched and we've decided that nobody owns it, is not an acceptable answer. There's no such thing, unfortunately, in America as anybody not owning anything, as a piece of property no longer owned. back a few hundred years ago, nobody owned. Then we have the lowest, then we have, we asked to take ownership to the center of the street and a letter from the borough president or obtain a CCO. So we asked them to pursue more with Corp Council and the borough president. We're trying to clean up a mess, right? And it's either like the owner's rep doesn't want to deal with it, or the owner doesn't want to deal with it, or they don't realize that it's a serious issue, and therefore they're not responding to us. So that's why I think a letter from our council to their council and owner now saying, fish or cut bait, we're going to have to.
All right.
We're going to have to end this. It's 2 years.
All right, I'll take a look at my notes.
Any other comments about this?
All right. Item number 13, 2017-48A, 36 Hardy Street, Staten Island.
We finally, the community board didn't have a chance to vote on this for the last hearing, so they finally did on May 8th, and they recommended approval. We don't have a final fire department sign-off. Their comments from July of 2017 actually may have been addressed, but they, in submissions by the architect subsequently, but the fire department actually needs to finally sign off on this. We do need to make sure, so there's a lot of different plans that were submitted and they're not coordinated through. So the BSA approved plans need to indicate that the building will be fully sprinklered, which is one of the fire department requirements. Fire department's comments were, development must be fully sprinklered, and that's a development, not just a new addition to the existing building, right? There must be a hydrant within 100 feet of the Siamese connection, which I do see on the plans now. It's right in front of the building, assuming it's right in front of the building as opposed to a new hydrant. I don't know the answer to that. It says that a hydrant must be, it says the hydrant must be within 100 feet of the Siamese connection and within 250 feet of the main front entrance, and parking spaces per the zoning requirements must be provided. With respect to parking, I'm curious what fire department is interested in there, because the way that parking is calculated for a house of worship is you take the largest room and you divide that by 10 based on rated occupancy, right? And what I saw in this plan is they take the largest room and they put up a partition, so it's no longer the largest room. So arguably they're short by 8 spaces. That's DOB's call about that, but it's, having been in lots of mosques, I'm pretty certain that that's all treated as one room. Maybe it doesn't matter that there's a separate there's a partition in terms of the functionality of the mosque, but in this case, it's all men on that one floor. So it'd be different if it was half women and half men on that floor, but it's not. The women are on the upper floor. So that seemed like a way of getting around the required parking it. So.
Yeah, I was looking at it with regards to the parking. I was just looking at what the plan showed, and the architect indicated in the plan that the rated capacity is 151. In the plan,
131.
No, 150.
131. It's hard to read, but it's 13. They're providing 13 spaces, and it's 131 divided by 10. And that other room is 82 rated occupancy, so they're arguably would be short by 8 spaces. But again, this is really a DOB call. But what I was curious about was, what was fire department getting at, that they are concerned about compliance with the parking? Are they concerned that excess parking will be clogging up a fire access? Because there is frontage on Map Street, so, or on accessible streets, so that's what I wasn't really understanding, right? So I think the map actually. And then DEP signed off on May 25th, and they just had some conditions that I'd want to include in the resolution ultimately. And then in terms of the plans, as I said, they submitted 3 different plans. It's like a sprinkler plan, a BPP, a plan that was sent to DEP and the DOB, and then the BSA set. And they need to all be coordinated. So in comparing the builder's pavement plan that was submitted on May 16th to the DEP plan that was submitted on May 29th, They
Right.
don't match with respect to the location of the street widening line. So they need to be conformed, all of them need to be conformed across the board. The builder's pavement plan shows a fence that seems to cut through the property, and perhaps it may also be showing two street widening lines. There are two sets of parallel dash lines that are pretty close to each other. I don't understand what they're for, and they're not labeled. So I don't know whether both of them need to be on the drawing. There's still an area labeled driveway on the north side of the lot, which is adjacent to Lot 10, to which there's no curb cut access. And so I'm just wondering, is that a mislabeling? Because there's no way for a car to get there without a curb cut. So maybe they don't mean the word driveway, maybe they just mean side yard or something, I don't know. Also, on the other side of the lot, the curb cut is actually a widening of an existing curb cut that's on another property. I'm just not sure if that's actually allowed, if DOT allows that. So that's a question. My understanding is they don't allow such things. They want to have a minimum distance between curb cuts, right?
Right.
Like one parking space or something like that. So I'm not sure this is even an allowed curb cut. So the applicant really needs to go to DOT and clarify that, or DOB and clarify that. Otherwise, they have to figure another way to get, well, that's only for 2 parking spaces. It's not the end of the world exactly, because their main access to their parking is from
Waverly.
Yeah, Waverly. And if it's to qualify for the 13 spaces, they might be able to figure out a way to do that. Like come in through the parking lot into those parking spaces, which are tandem. I don't know. Then the other thing is the area on Waverly that's undeveloped doesn't have the same hatching on the builder's pavement plan as on Hardy, where it shows that it's going to be replacing a portion of the roadway which is required under a builder's pavement plan, whereas Waverly's being extended into this property, into in front of this property to allow access to the curb cut in the parking lot. So they have to show on the builder's pavement plan the extension of Waverly to reach the site.
I had a similar question with regards to the curb cut on Waverly, because the curb cut seems to be straddling 2 properties.
Oh, on Waverly also.
Yeah. I don't know if that's existing or that's proposed, so if the applicant can clarify that.
Okay. Anybody else on this? No? Okay.
Move on?
Yeah.
Item number 14, 2017-218 A35 House Street, Staten Island.
So are we still waiting for our DEP sign-off letter? I didn't find it in the file, the last
No,
letter.
we have it.
We have it. Last letter was April 5th, which was not a sign-off. If there's a subsequent one, I didn't find it. DEP. DOT did sign off on May 17th based on a 35-foot road width. I know DEP, they've been talking about it, but I didn't find the actual final sign-off.
No, I'm pretty sure,
Okay, so if you could just check that. And then at the last hearing, I asked that the applicant demonstrate that the house now situated with a 2-foot side yard complies with the side yard requirements of 23-46C, which is distance between buildings on adjacent lots. All they have to do is just go through that provision and just state yes or no. I mean, that's the only thing. They didn't do that.
That's the latest one in the file.
Okay, so we may or may not be waiting for the DEP final sign-off. Any other comments on this one?
I believe there's some question with that building being right up on the sidewalk and whether or not that's going to be an issue with regard to side yard area.
Right.
And I can't say I'm agreed with the idea that these GCLs are used to circumvent zoning regulations. I'm not really sure how
Right, so that's the thing. We talked about it at the last hearing, that if they never extend the street, it's not an issue because the property is owned by this property owner and has a very large side yard. But if this street is extended, the house will sit right on the edge of the sidewalk, so without a side yard. Or then it would be a front yard, actually, so it would be out of compliance with the front yard. But that's different because it would be an existing non-complying condition created by making that a front yard. But this isn't designing any breathing room, right? So even though they improved the width of the street, I have a problem with many of these GCL things because they are being used to come up with novel concepts for zoning. And I know that, let's say, our purview is arguably to look at whether the fire department can get through or whether DOT needs the land. But at the same time, we need to see whether, well, for instance, on some of the GCLs, they didn't comply with zoning. We sent them back, and they said, oh, yeah, or we sent them to DOB, and DOB said, oh, yeah, and so they had to modify the project. If we didn't do that, they would go ahead and develop a project that arguably would not have been where the errors might not have been picked up. And so I don't think we can ignore these things. And also our purview is to see if projects do sort of violence to the overall city plan.
What if the resolution just says that we are not opining as to whether or not this is zoning compliant? Shouldn't that key the Department of Buildings to make that determination?
No, so in this case, it's not a question of being zoning compliant as long as they have the adequate distance between the building next door. This is more of an urbanism question. It's like DOT pushed back and DEP pushed back on this site and made the building smaller and smaller, right? So that they could eventually get a 35-foot wide road, right? But then we look at it and can say, all right, if they ever built the road there, this house would be right up against the sidewalk. And then we had talked about, Commissioner Shonda and I had talked about this, the fact that this developer had a much larger lot, subdivided into 4 lots, chose to distribute the houses on that bigger lot in the way that it did, so that it would take advantage of being built at the bed of the street. It didn't need to do that, right? So this GCL waiver is facilitating what ultimately was the developer's choice in how to make money out of a much larger lot. And so...
No, I think the GCL waiver probably would have been required.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not a
I think the GCL waiver would have been required only the extent of the building sitting right against that easement line or anything could have been.
I sent it to you.
Great.
You know, I
The
have
building
it.
could have shifted further in. They could have still maybe what they're
It's a
providing.
25-foot.
25 foot, and they could have been still some sidewalk if the other buildings had shifted a little bit. I think they still would have required the GCL.
Yes.
But that's all the owner is making, so it's just, it would have made a better site plan by doing that.
Aren't you inserting variance findings of character and
I agree
D's
with you.
finding of
That-
self-creation into a case that does not require that?
Well, actually, if we want to be really technical about this, these GCL waivers need to have a hardship. We never talk about whether there's a hardship. What's the hardship? I don't know.
Unless there was an issue with the submission.
So,
Well, at least we would be within the findings if we request information on the hardship versus talking about findings that are not pertinent for this type of case. So I would be more comfortable now insisting that these cases show the hardship, so to speak. That would be comfortable for me because that would be sticking within the findings for this particular type of case instead of kind of melding the case so that it kind of is amorphously handling variance findings, which we have no business discussing.
I would second that, but I would ask that, along with the hardship, that unless this hardship shows that they wouldn't be compliant with zoning regulation, compliant side yard and front yard, and space between other adjacent buildings, that they'd have to show a real hardship reason as to why as well.
hardship reason as to
To
why.
why they're non-compliant, they wouldn't be complying with the zoning resolution
No, so in all of these cases, they are complying with the zoning?
must.
Well, they must comply with zoning. But one of the things that we do is we're reviewing we look at the buildings and we can't help ourselves. We're like, the side yards are too small. And so we look at the building and we say, you're not allowed to have a curb cut that's adjacent to another curb cut. And the entire project is based on improper reading or let's say faulty reading of the zoning resolutions or of the building code or something. And I actually think, frankly, as an architect, I would have loved an agency to tell me that I messed up so that I don't end up going to the Department of Buildings and I've done construction documents that my client has to pay for and everything. Then I find out the building has to move X feet or I can't enter it in that direction. I would consider that a service because if that doesn't happen, I get sued for malpractice, right? So I would much prefer as many eyes as possible finding problems with the site in terms of compliance that maybe I'm not aware of because I don't have experience in whatever. So that's a different subject. And in terms of the urbanism issue, I think of the BSA as one of its land use agencies, right? And so land use and planning and all of those things feed in. And when we talk about what the GCL waivers are, which is quite an unusual phenomenon of the BSA, I don't see why sometimes we can't be talking about the impact that these waivers are having on the street system, which is what we talked about. Like, that's how this got to be wider in part, right? DOT said, no, we want to be able to continue this. We considered maybe this isn't a GCL waiver that we should grant because it's clear that this is a road that only has a few blocks that need to be opened, and it's completely clear in order for that continuity. So then, and the house got significantly smaller as a result of the pushbacks from 3 agencies, right? And so I don't think it's out of place.
But
go ahead, yeah.
I just want to say the pushbacks from those agencies were about the findings of having access to the street system and to the building, not
Yes.
urbanism
Right, but
in
that's not
terms
their
of
thing,
how it's
right?
affecting the character. So they're at least staying within the findings of the GCL waiver about access, the intent rather, of access. And so I understand that, and I'm in agreement that they should tackle it from that position. I'm just registering my concern that we tackle it from a direction that is not strictly defined by the findings, because then there's no end to what you could say, you know, and it could be incorporated into the argument, and then nobody could make use of the GCL 35 or 36. And if we wanted it that nobody made use of it, well, then we need to do away with it. But we can't do it by us sitting here going, well, let's just add another requirement and a way of looking at this, and let's add another one, and it may not be relevant to the case and the reason for having this case. That's my concern.
Well, more specifically on this case, if we're fairly certain that they are going to widen the street, it seems like that's going to happen. And
We don't.
No. If it was going to happen, DOT would have said, we actually have this as part of our capital plan. The problem is they don't own this land, so they would need to acquire it. They do own a portion of it down below where it's mapped and unimproved. So it sounds like, you know, they don't have to acquire a lot of land, and the roadway continues to a point, then stops with maybe 2 or 3 blocks, and then above that, it continues again. So it's an obvious place where, in terms of the street system, they would want to do that. They would want to continue it, and this is quite rare for them to be demanding that the house be pushed. So it seems like they do have something in mind, but it's not part of their capital plan, so they can't
So
state
it's
what it
likely
is.
to assume, it won't be safe to assume then that in the future it may be widened the street. Is that fair to say? In which case, approving this as is would create a non-compliance.
No. Well, it automatically does.
They would
Yeah.
just take what they needed and compensate
Right.
the current owner, whoever that person might
doesn't-
be, for what they take.
So no matter what happens, even if let's just, so the thing that I was talking about is I didn't like the idea that the house will sit right there on the edge of the sidewalk, right? It's not the only place in New York where a house sits on the edge of the sidewalk. By the way, let's go outside, everything's on the edge of the sidewalk, right? But let's just say it provided a side yard. In this location, the side yard requirement's a lot, but let's just say it provided a lesser side yard, and an anticipatory side yard of, say, 2 feet, just to throw out a number, right? When the road is built, or if the road is built, that road, that front becomes a front yard. So no matter what, becomes a non-complying condition, and that's not the fault of the owner. Let's say they provided complying side yards, the front yard requirements are much bigger, so the house could never be compliant. But that happens a lot, where you build a road and all of a sudden it throws everything out of whack with respect to the zoning resolution, but they're all legal non-compliant conditions, right? And this would be a legal non-compliant condition because frankly, they've got a really big side yard right now because the house is pushed all the way over to the side. So there isn't anything non-compliant about it as long as that distance between buildings is good, and I just don't know. So, what can I say? Right?
Okay, and we have DOT.
And we have a DEP sign off without any further review. There's no last line that says, we'll continue to look at this, because that's what they often say.
Now, it says the drainage plan PRDE seat sheet 203 dated May 1973 shows a future 10-inch diameter sanitary sewer and a 15-inch storm sewer in the bed of North Bergen Avenue between Howe and Bosworth. The proposed site plan dated May 21st, prepared by Joseph Marachi, shows a 28-8 wide area of the site to remain open, plus 6.6 feet 4 of the widening portion on the adjacent lot 47, block 303. A total of 35 feet of the North Berger Avenue, which will be available for installation, maintenance, or reconstruction of the existing future sewers and water main. In addition, the site plan shows 15-foot wide maintenance corridor easement for the terminal manhole of the 8-inch diameter sanitary sewer, which will be available for maintenance construction of the existing 8-inch diameter sanitary sewer. Based on the above, DEP has no objections to the proposed application.
Okay, good. All
That
right.
was God.
As it were, or
There we go.
whoever you choose. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Next.
Next, new case, item number 15, 215-15A, 144, 18181st Street. So I have an update on this file, so when you want to.
Okay. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials. I didn't find community board recommendation in the folder. We do have DOT sign off as of February 21st, 2017. And we have fire department conditional sign off as of January 30th, 2017, provided that the building is fully sprinklered. However, DEP comments as of April 16th, 18 are rather serious here relative to this application and need to be resolved before we can move forward. There's a huge sewer easement running all the way through this property. You can't build on top of a sewer easement. Yeah, it's pretty enormous, so I would say that's the critical thing here.
Okay, so I have a comment, an email from the applicant from this morning. She wanted to update me on this case, which is scheduled for initial hearing, regarding the DEP objection. The owner engaged Wall and Amara Engineering in order to amend the drainage plan. Upon review, the engineer has advised us that it's not possible to amend the drainage plan. Now, I have an email from the engineer, and we'll be submitting a formal letter in response to DEP's letter later today. It seems like the only option is to provide a 35-foot sewer corridor on the subject lot and redesign the building to a zero-lot building.
Good luck with that.
That is possible since the lot is 50 feet wide, resulting in a 15-foot wide building that would comply with the zoning district regulations requiring 8-foot distance between residential buildings. They're going to prepare a new site plan, which they will submit later this afternoon.
So they're going to submit stuff that we haven't seen yet to review. So should we adjourn this so it gives us a chance to look at this?
I don't know.
They're free to submit.
Yeah.
Whether or not you'll have time to
Yeah, we won't have time to look at
Yeah,
it.
you can
I don't
talk-
know.
you can
We can
talk
talk
about it
about it, I
tomorrow.
guess, yeah.
Yeah, I think this was one of the ones that we discussed with DEP, also L'Oreal with.
Wow, there's really
discussion about
room there?
amending the
I don't
drainage
see.
plans.
I have to say, this was a very interesting letter that we got from DEP, given that if you look at the rest of the block, the buildings, existing buildings are on these easements.
Yeah, so it's like.
So all the buildings that's to the south, they are sitting on this easement. So for DEP to insist that only for this one portion to have a 35-foot easement, it's kind of strange, especially when one of the building is already straddling within the abutting building is straddling the easement.
So the way an easement works is you agree to the easement, and if you've got an existing building on it, you're not allowed to rebuild the existing building. So if the building ever comes down, then that's the end of the building. And so, and for them to, they have to rewrite the easement. They don't
Who has
waive,
to rewrite the
DEP,
easement?
the easement is in
does.
favor of DEP. Arguably, the property owner was at some stage in its history compensated for it because you own the land to the deepest deeps and the highest heights, right? So somebody in the chain of title was compensated. So that's like life everywhere in America, where if government takes property for its own use, you have to honor it, and if there's an existing building on it, eventually, if that building were taken down, you would have to leave it down. So unless we haven't seen a
So-
copy of the easement,
Right,
so.
is it possible that easement may have been written after these buildings were built with the hope that they will come
Yeah,
down?
yeah.
Okay.
That's very typical, right. So, you're deciding you're going to do telephone lines or a railway or something, so they claim easements throughout an area even though there are few improvements. And eventually, those improvements will either be purchased and removed, or they'll come down with time. But often easements will say, you're not allowed to improve this thing. You're not allowed to file for a building permit, you're not allowed to whatever, and they hope eventually it'll fall down.
It should be in the file, I don't know.
I mean, some of these are new buildings, so I don't know. At
Okay,
least
well,
from the
so, but
photos.
you know what, we're not easement people, so if the property owner wants to make a deal with DEP and say, get rid of my easement,
I'm just throwing.
have a nice day.
I know, I'm just
Right?
throwing the question on, the whole reason is not to me, it's not clear.
It's an easement from
Because it-
1951. And if other people built in defiance of the easement, that wouldn't be the first time. We've seen cases here where people build in defiance of their easement. It doesn't mean it's illegal.
No, it's just like lean down again.
Legal under civil law. The people who enforce are the owners of the easement, right? So, but that's not our job, and right now, we have DEP saying we have an easement, get off our easement. So they're, those are the orders. Yeah, those are the orders, and when what is it called, when you're enforcing your own property right? I think it's called enforcing your own property right. Okay.
Okay. I'll get it back from you.
Okay, go. What happened? You need that? Okay, you're afraid of where I'll put it? Okay.
Thank you.
Resubmit it, though, just to make sure. So I know I've seen it in the file, okay. Zoning calendar decision items, item number 16, 2017-221BZ, 1781 Bay Ridge Parkway, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have a May 29th Fire Department sign-off. Photos show landscaping and light shield installed. Yay, thank you. They look good, actually. The plans were revised, and plans that were revised and submitted in March 29th actually show the landscaping densely planted and indicate that lighting will be shielded. So we've wrapped up the drawings with the actuality, so I don't think there's anything. Okay.
Continued hearing items, item number 17, 8715BZ, 182 Minna Street, Brooklyn. There's an adjournment request on this.
Yes.
Item number 18, 17815BZ, 9947 Davenport Court, Queens.
They also requested an adjournment for ZRD1 review. This will be it's ZRD1 review on the floodplains, right? So that's the kind of thing that we ask them to do. I don't want to penalize them if it's longer in the getting. It is this is going to be, which adjournment, the third adjournment. But again, this is something we ask them to do, and they really need to. So,
Okay,
sorry, hold on a second.
let me know when you're ready.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Okay, item number 19, 24615BZ, 1462 62nd Street, Brooklyn, and item number 20, 2016-4179BZ, 1462 62nd Street.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So on the ongoing ECB violation search, and I'm aware that BIS is very slow in revealing when violations have been cured, so that's why I always ask their expediter to give an update. BIS still shows 12 open ECB violations, 3 of which were issued on March 5th and 2 on April 20th, and 8 open DOB violations, 2 of which were also in March and April, and still tens of thousands of dollars in fines due. They entered into some kind of a payment stipulation, but they said that they were, at the last hearing, that they were due to pay a number of those kind of time payments. And so I'd just like an update on what happened with that, and to advise on the status of the actual open violations. So the expediter should come to the hearing as he did the last time. And fire department, by the way, which I mentioned at the last hearing, filed a complaint on March 5th asking that DOB inspect for illegal occupancy, which DOB did on March 8th. Fire department sent a May 17th letter listing outstanding violations that need to be cured. They advised us, however, that we can incorporate these as conditions in our resolution, so they don't need those to hold up the decision if we're okay with everything else. Equity Environmental submitted a revised EAS on May 30th that includes an interior noise monitoring session, which we spoke about at the last hearing, which was performed on April 19th with the new windows in place. They show that exterior noise sources are attenuated to actually below 45 dBA, which is what's required by law. The EAS also indicates that a 10-foot acoustical fence will be installed at the play roof, and the plans that were submitted on February 7th have a note to this effect. DEP had noise comments on April 25th, which is that about the amount of attenuation that's required, and that the rooftop play area needs a 10-foot acoustic fence. So they've complied with the requirements from DEP. And they submitted a response to DOT comments on April 23rd, but I didn't see DOT's reply. Did they respond?
Yeah, we had a DOT.
Okay. And we have hazmat sign off.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you make, forward to me the DOT sign off? Anybody else on this? No? Okay.
Move on? Mm-hmm. Item number 21, 2016-4276BZ, 333 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. I think everything was addressed.
Yeah. Good.
Mm-hmm.
They still need a vapor barrier, but the DEP has no objection to doing that as a condition of grant.
Okay. Okay.
Move on.
Just a second. Did DEP describe the kind of vapor barrier? Because that's the language.
They propose what type of vapor barrier, and then DEP approves it.
Okay.
DEP said they're okay with doing that review and approval as a condition, which we
Okay.
sometimes do.
So what may be helpful is very helpful, is if the applicant today would send us their proposed vapor barrier so that we can use the correct language in the resolution.
Okay.
And then subject to DEP approval, but to that effect. Okay. Okay.
Item number 22, 2016-4295BZ, 1074 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
They made the requested modifications.
You're good with it, right? Yay. Item number 23, 2016-4467BZ, 6925 Astoria Boulevard, Queens. This is going to be good. Whose case is this?
Okay.
Oh, Joyce, why is it not?
Wait, sorry.
They just change it.
Change it? I'll change it.
We have a new letter of April 10th of support from Councilmember Constantinides. The proposal is to remove the smaller of the two signs to reduce the scope of the waiver, and as previously discussed, reduce the size of the remaining sign so as not to encroach on the neighbor's property. So it would go from 14 by 48 to 10 foot 6 by 36. The number of lights are also being reduced from 6 to 3. The cover letter states that the applicant did not look at the potential for an accessory business sign on the site because it isn't a commercial zoning lot. I thought that's kind of an interesting subject in general, because the advertising sign has been in place since prior to 1961, so, which I view as a commercial use, right? And it's true that signs don't have use groups, but the use itself has been commercial. It certainly hasn't been residential. So wouldn't it have been, even though the advertising sign per se isn't permitted, wouldn't that have sort of be a state of non-conforming commercial use on the site? It's pretty weird. It's like, doesn't come up very often because you don't have signs that create the use on the site.
But to be an accessory, would have to be in the
No,
same zoning?
no, but.
As the primary?
No. First, they're saying it has to be, they can't put an accessory sign there because the lot isn't commercial. And I'm like, how could the lot not be commercial? It's had a commercial use on the site since 1937 or whatever date that is, right? So I find that, I would, that's an argument I'd make at DOB. What do you mean? It's been a commercial use since all that time. Then the only way, then all they would have to do is merge with the neighbor, a zoning lot. They don't have to sell, they don't have to anything, just merge the zoning lot, and then the neighbor could, whichever side, could use that sign as an accessory business sign. So not sure if they're correct that this cannot be used. I would argue that it could.
That was my question. I thought that they could just merge, and then it's one larger zoning lot, and then they could put up the accessory business sign, but maybe they can give us more information about that tomorrow in the hearing.
Yes. Then the only other comment I have before turning to you about the financials, there's a letter from the applicant itself discussing the lack of interest that wireless providers would have for this site without any support from any wireless providers, and assuming that the antennae would be mounted to this existing sign structure. If I were the owner of property and I was actually trying to persuade a wireless supplier to come and use my site, I would be exploring all kinds of things, like the provider's installation of a cell phone tower or similar structure, or extension of this structure to provide for more cell towers or cell antenna. So I'm not, it seems like such a conclusory statement in both cases. Can't do it, can't do it. So, yeah. So anyway, other comments?
Yeah, I agree with you as to the telecommunications installation scenario, because they talk about, it's low height means that it's a less competitive site. They give us an article that shows that a site could generate as much as $15,000 a month in income, or as little as like $100 a month in income. And then they give us a letter from the very company that owns this site, Outset Media, that basically says, oh, we have a similar site in the Bronx that's 50 feet high, and all they get is $200 a month, so therefore this site would get $200 a month. So to me, then they'd say, so obviously that's not feasible. Well, any appraisal has got to use independently verifiable comparables. You can't rely on your own information to make your case. And so they literally have to treat this as a serious inquiry that we've made and do a study of similar sites and then give us the income from the comparables and have that inform what the income could be generated on this site with the telecommunications installation on the existing sign pole, and then show us whether or not it works or not works. But you can't do it based on the owner because the owner is biased. The owner doesn't want to do that. So therefore, you know, what do we do with that kind of information when we receive it? We go, well, the owner's biased, so we really can't pay much attention to it.
Right.
There is money out there to be made, and they have to show us through comparables that it can't be made here.
I have a question, though. They're already modifying the sign structure significantly because it's too long, right? They're having to chop it off. The structure might have to be modified. Well, it certainly has to be modified because it's all this kind of enmeshed structural system. So why do they have to look at installing the antennae on the existing structure without modifying the structure? For instance, I know that you need to have height on these things. So if the sign is a little bit shy of high enough, like it needs another 8 feet or 10 feet or something like that, why wouldn't that be part of the analysis to get over the rooftop, say, of those 3-story houses that are a little bit further, right?
Well, they don't really even address that issue. They just say, I mean, from what I read, they just said, well, you know, there's a lot of competition from other sites that could provide more in terms of, I guess, allowing reach of the antenna. But they don't really go into the fact that this surrounding area is a low-rise area and you only need a certain amount of height to be able to get over that. So they really need to talk about that. Because you're right, the tallest thing around there is like 3 stories.
Right.
So maybe they don't need much more than what they have.
Anybody else?
Oh, did you want me to say my financial comments as well?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to? So, you know, my comments as to the telecommunications equipment leases, it has to be based on more than just Outfront Media's letter in terms of determining the possible income that this site could have. As to the e-finding, I'm not sure that they have got the projected income for the Q11 site correct yet, because it is a direct read and it is at an industry standard, even though it's a smaller industry standard than it was. And they're basically backing into an income projection based on the other sign on the other side, the one that they're actually decommissioning, that is a cross read and not a direct read. And so I think that they have to base the income here on other direct read signs, and I'm not sure that they're getting at the possible income here. They're also talking about, you know, they're talking about the risk in terms of what this unusual smaller size would mean in terms of being able to lease up for a continuous year. And it is an industry standard size, even though it's a smaller one, which means that it's very simple to crop your message to fit the new signage because the perspective is the same. And this is going to be one of the few legal signs in the area. And so to me, there's going to be great demand here at this site. So those are the reasons why I think that they have a much lower assumption of what the income could be here than it is. And then also, I am not convinced by their cap rate argument. They are still high at 16%. I don't see anything in New York City at 16%, and they're still talking about the risk. And I'm sorry, but there is no risk to owning the only legal direct read industry standard site sign on the arterial. There just isn't. So I don't see any justification for a cap rate of 16. And so in a nutshell, I think the income is probably still too low. I think the cap rate is definitely too high, and so I don't think they've met the E finding yet.
Anybody else?
Done? 24, 2017, 8BZ, 356, 362 East 139th Street, the Bronx.
Okay, they requested an adjournment.
Item number 25, 2017, 187BZ, 3660 East Tremont Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, in response to a discussion at the last hearing, the applicant proposes a different kind of a fencing system that uses concrete panels that sort of slip into these posts, which we see on roadways, actually. And because of its material, I'm assuming it has acoustical value, but they didn't provide any spec sheets to indicate that it does that. So, and I went onto the website for the material, and it lists it under acoustical materials, but then it doesn't tell you anything in the specs about it, except that it shows you that it's used on roadsides to protect residential neighborhoods. So it's probably fine. The landscaping plan, though, needs just a slight correction. It's still showing a wood stockade fence. So they need to correct that and key the acoustical fencing detail that's on drawing 12 to the site plan, and so that the drawings are consistent throughout, because right now drawing 12 is just floating there in the set, and you don't know that you're getting this concrete acoustical fence in that location. And those were my comments. Anybody else?
I also went to the website. It seems like it should suffice, although specs about it as well.
Yeah. And it definitely looks better than the plastic thing that they were proposing.
They've been very responsive to all our questions and.
Yeah. Item number 26, 2017, 191BZ, 47 Green Street, Manhattan.
Okay. They provided a 400-foot and a 1,000-foot radius study that shows the preponderance of retail uses in Soho. I thought this was kind of a curious study because everyone knows there's lots of retail in Soho. But I don't see how that study establishes that this is unique. Many of the buildings that are in that area are grandfathered as retail or obtained special permits from city planning, or with the smaller floor plate ones, they were the subject of variances, and they didn't go through how those uses were obtained, right? So, and at the last hearing, importantly, we were skeptical that we have an A finding at all. So I'd like to know how those materials were supposed to be supporting the argument for an A. And the statement of facts reiterates the last stated points about the loading dock and street location when we already discussed these points is not unique to Soho, and that have been rejected as rationale by the board in the past. And they provided a case where the board actually rejects those arguments. That's 54 Thompson Street. The service elevator argument is also not particularly relevant in this case because the proposed use is at grade. But even if there is a requirement to share it with the tenants, which they didn't provide us a copy of, they didn't provide us a copy of the stipulation. I also don't see how that's a problem, since that's the norm in all commercial buildings, where you wait for the service elevator, or sometimes they have a reservation way of dealing with it, and you schedule the use. All businesses work like that in New York, right? Even our office, if you try to move something, you need to schedule with management to get a use of the service elevator.
And pay for it.
Right, and in this case, right, and in this case, there's a passenger elevator also, which is very unusual in these buildings that there's both, right? So, and the lot size in this case is larger than the 25 by 100 buildings that are most often the subject of these variances. And they provided a big stack of cases, some of which were the same cases they provided previously, but I actually reviewed all of them. And every one of them are distinguishable from the subject lot, either because the sites were significantly narrower, because there were additional hardships related to the lot configuration or the building itself, or they were vacant lots, right? So I didn't find those cases useful at all. And what they were doing in their narrative was pulling out from it. Oh, look, in this case, there was something relevant to us, but it's different. Those things don't stand alone. The board looked at them as a cumulative impact, right? And oftentimes, in fact, every time, the other thing that was the problem was the big problem, right? Not that there's more retail use in the neighborhood. That wasn't that wasn't actually even considered. It may have been discussed in the resolution, but it wasn't the finding that was made to find it unique, right? So, any others?
I don't think any of the new information helped me with the uniqueness of.
Speak up.
Sorry, I said I don't think the new information helped me with the uniqueness.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I went through every single one of those cases as well, and it showed that it wasn't just the one or two things that they picked out and put in the narrative, but actually there were other factors of uniqueness that actually were in the aggregate with those two things, part of what allowed the BSA to award them the particular grant. So I didn't find that any of those cases were supported at all for this case in this moment. I mean, I looked at the studies and I didn't find them particularly helpful to their case. Like, for instance, they had that 400-foot radius and they said there are 104 buildings and 12 have conforming as-of-right ground floor uses, right? Then they go on to say there are 40 buildings with frontages equal to or greater than the subject and only 4 have as-of-right ground floor uses. Well, I'm not sure that means anything in terms of hardship. To me, the smaller sites are more encumbered than the subject, and that's more relevant to me than what other larger sites that are even larger than this site, because this site is pretty large. Also, the study talks about the buildings with greater than 48.33 frontage, legal use versus actual use, and I think we should just be going by legal use and not actual use, because the subject lot has an actual use that is not the same as its legal use, so that kind of makes it the same as everybody else who's got an actual first floor commercial use, when in fact they should not have a use group 6 on the first floor. So I didn't find that very helpful at all. I felt that the 1,000-foot radius chart with the conforming uses on the ground floor is more helpful if you get to the C finding, because it's showing that having retail on the first floor will do no harm here.
Right.
So I think that was actually in the wrong place. So they did address my financial comments. If we do ever get to the B finding, I just want to make one statement, because they do say that their cellar will not be used as retail selling space, and they're willing to accept a condition that there should be no cellar selling space for retail, and that's fine with me. Then I'm fine with them saying that the retail leases are incorporating accessory cellar storage into them without assigning any extra income. So I think they should be prepared that if we ever get that far, the resolution will specifically say, and no selling space in the cellar.
Right. That's, be careful what you wish for, right?
Right.
Any other comments on this? And I do want to point out that, the hardship in this case, in addition to being unconvincing, is in addition to that, there's already a special permit readily available from city planning, and they've been at the BSA as long as it would take to get a special permit from city planning. So I've done a lot of those special permits. They're easy to do. You do the advertising simultaneous with the application and all of that, and you have your approval in a year and a half. So had they started, they would have been done already, or they would have been close to done, if not done already. Okay.
Monica, come.
Go ahead.
Next. Item number 27, 2017-213BZ, 1808 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. So there were additional letters submitted in opposition to the project totaling something like 200. It's a little hard for me to tell because some of them were submitted literally the day after the hearing or maybe on the same day as the hearing, so we didn't take them into account when we were at the hearing. The main concerns are appropriateness of the facility in the neighborhood. The applicant addressed those concerns in their latest submission, but I think they should restate them at the hearing for the benefit of the public and for anyone who would be watching the video. They should explain how they're going to be addressing those concerns. We were provided with a sort of description of how the proposed project will work relative to the educational component in the May 2nd submission. However, the May 11th submission includes a very clear description of how the 1830 program, the one down the street, works, and indicates that high school students are in restart classes from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. and work on their homework after dinner and chores. So I'm not understanding at all why the proposed location isn't mirroring the schedule. Then we could really understand, though, look, the high school students are in those classrooms working with teachers during those periods. My understanding with the Restart program is that the Restart teachers actually come to the site, which is apparently what's going on at the 1830 building. The cover letter states that the project is entitled to Cornell deference as an educational institution because this provider must comply with OASAS standards, Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse, I think, right, for community residential programs. However, the letter doesn't cite to any specific section in the OASAS to support this statement, which I have to say, because I have to say it, not citing to a specific section, if it exists in that section, is, or when it exists in that section, is laziness on the applicant's part and forces the board to do its work for it. So as a result, I have to go through all of the sections and find the reference to education. That's not okay. It's not representing properly, advocating properly for the case. So in reading through the regulations, I found section 820.5A, which is the general program standards for OASAS certified programs, providing, quote, residential services, which this project qualifies for, which states that, quote, the program sponsor, unquote, which is an undefined term, so I actually don't know who they mean by that, must approve, this quote, must approve written policies, procedures, and methods, which, among others, must address at a minimum, quote, and it's number 15, procedures whereby required educational services are provided for school-aged children or who are in residence as either an individual who is receiving treatment or as part of a family unit. So that's where the regulations require this organization to provide educational services because they have school-aged children. And there's also section 820.5E, which requires, quote, all residential programs to make available either directly or through referral to appropriate agencies. This is paragraph 2, availability of required educational and child care services in each program which provides services to school-aged children. So that's them fulfilling in their program the requirements of the government-sponsored program. Because I had to read every single section, I learned some things. And one is that if this facility is considered a, quote, stabilization and rehabilitation service, which it kind of sounds like it is, the way they're describing it, which is described in section 820.6B2, Roman numeral 9, it requires at least 2 staff members per overnight shift, one of which must be a clinical staff member. So the way it's been described to us, that's not what's happening, and the community is concerned, and so I'd like to understand either maybe this is not a stabilization and rehabilitation service. I didn't look up the definition of that. I'm not an expert on this kind of service, so I wouldn't necessarily know one if I saw one. So they have to explain why they don't have to provide those 2 overnight staffers. And then the sections and elevations that were provided need to show where the proposed project penetrates or doesn't the zoning envelope. It does, actually. The rear yard doesn't comply. And a complete plan set needs to be submitted at the same time. So they gave us 2 floating drawings, and it wasn't with the rest. So then what do we put that together with? And then I didn't find anything in the submission that addresses the neighborhood character question with respect to the requested rear yard construction waiver. Is it certain, so for instance, because it's a staircase being built in the rear yard, what is that affecting? Is it affecting only business rear yards? Yeah, what is it? They've never addressed that question, which we discussed at the last hearing. And then the other question I had, which I think I mentioned at the last hearing, is it certain that a second stair, as opposed to an interior scissor stair, is required? Could the exterior stair be an open stair like we had in that school, in that little school, which improved enormously the aesthetics of the building? And in this case, wouldn't impose so much on a rear yard if it's shared with neighbors who rely on a rear yard, as opposed to a business like that's built full to the lot. So they should provide building code citations for this, explain why they can't put a scissor stair in, which, as long as it's far enough distance, should be adequate. Maybe not, because it's a small building, that's why. Some scissor stairs in small buildings are often allowed. So those things should be looked at. Any other comments on this one?
No, I had no question. I think using the example of 1830 was definitely helpful, and I thought the scheduling, utilization schedule that they're proposing, it does show that they are going to use the classrooms from 9 to 12 and 12:30 to 2:30, and then the rest of the time there will be class, like used for homeworks and other things. So unless I misread, that's kind of what I gathered. So
no, actually, that was the thing that was confusing. The way they described what happens in those classrooms was sort of, vocational training, how to move back into society classes, things like that, as opposed to tying it in directly to the high school. They were not saying that there's a set-aside room between the hours of 9:30 and whatever, I don't really care when it is, that are specifically for the high school students to be trained by Restart teachers, as opposed to 1830, where it's clear as day that however many students there are, those students are in some kind of program. And I understand there's different ages, there's different grade levels, maybe there's private tutoring going on. None of that matters as long as the kids are in a kind of some kind of classroom setting during fixed periods where we know that they're going for their these aren't even GEDs, this is credits that go back to their high schools, right? So it's not even like an outside training program, like a GED type program. So this is really tied right back into their high schools. And I just don't understand how the applicant missed the link between the obvious of 1830 and the not obvious of the proposed, which was done first, right?
I kind of got a little bit of what both of you are saying. So, I mean, I looked at the schedule of 1830 and saw that they have, 5 hours a day set aside for education. And then they then say, this is an example of what's going to happen at the subject site. But then they go on to say, like you said, vocational services, job skills, training, employment readiness, and educational remediation, life parenting, and social skills, not all necessarily education towards a degree or for a degree granting, institution. And then they talk about having 1 classroom and 3 individual counseling rooms, and that the clients will be a variety of ages and different educational levels and instructed in a small group kind of homeschooling sort of setting, which leads me to think, well, are the teachers actually coming to that site to instruct them, or are they kind of getting their instruction over at 1830, coming back and doing the work here, like in a homework kind of format, but they get to work towards the day? I was missing that crucial link that you're talking about. Right. So
I read it as in addition to what happens at 1830, they're doing this as well, but I may have been I read it as.
That the kids go to 1830?
As an addition to what happens at 1830, this facility, 1808, also does these things, but I may have misread that.
So you're saying it's going to replicate 1830? Is that
No,
what you're saying?
no. In addition, say it again,
In addition to what the type of schooling at 1830, this has other, offers these other services, these also vocational services. That's how I understood it, and that may be because at the last hearing, you're talking about the setting aside of these small groups to work on these like vocational issues. But I guess I think it's clear that needs clarification at this point.
Right. Yeah. Clear that it needs to be clear.
With regard to what was stated about the type of rehabilitation and such, I think that the dynamic would argue that the rehabilitation portion of this is actually done upstate, and that this is more of a schooling, educational portion of it. Because the detox rehabilitation is actually something that is done off-site, according to their documents.
So it was stabilization and, what was the other word? Stabilization and rehab. So I don't know if those are conjunctive and they travel together, or whether there's such a thing as stabilization but not rehab, and whether this is stabilization as opposed to rehab, which is already done. I'm not pretending to be even remotely related to an expert. Like, I don't even have a relative who's an expert, right? So this is for them to clarify why they don't have to comply with that section, right?
With regard to the 243 members of the community that wrote letters, while I certainly can appreciate their concern, while this would be a 20-bed community, there still is 1830 that does do similar work here. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration when reading these.
So in other words, if 1830 is causing a problem, that's an issue. But if 1830 they didn't even know was there, which has been my experience with a lot of these kinds of centers, neighbors don't even know they're there until they apply for a permit to enlarge it or build another one, and then they make reference to the one that was on that other street, and then everybody was like, oh, I didn't know it was on that other street, but now I'm against it.
Well, and I'd like to say that that was my belief for most of these, but some of them actually do mention some concerns about 1830 people smoking outside of it, and
okay.
But
that could be the employee.
That could be.
Well, but it shouldn't be allowed at all, so, right? There shouldn't be any sort of hanging out in front of these things.
But if
it is a school.
Okay, if I am an employee, not a student, and I go outside and smoke.
Should be reprimanded.
Employee, not a student, which can be done by any one of those
25 feet from
users
the
that
front
are
of the
on
building
Coney
is what the
Island
regulation is.
Avenue that are
Yeah.
running businesses. They can go out and smoke. So
Right.
you don't know who is smoking, and you don't know the person who is smoking is a student or an employee
Right,
of the
right.
facility. So
That's
to
true.
kind of just use that blanketly and therefore say they're a nuisance, I do
Yeah,
question.
no, I agree.
But also,
But
just to also characterize people who are trying to rehabilitate their lives as an issue or safety concern, I think is something I would do with caution. And I think we should consider that when we're reviewing those lines.
Right, agree. And I do have to say that having a little bit of exposure to one community, in this case, it was a homeless shelter not too far from my neighborhood, where the community was objecting after they realized it was there. After it had been there for 3 years or something, right? One of the things that the operators did is they made sure that the building was a model citizen. So it would actually have been forbidden for anyone to smoke outside of the building or hang outside of the building, because what they're trying to do is to show that we have zero, you don't even know we're here, try and find us, right? And so that puts them at a higher bar than everybody else. And is that fair? No, but that's the reality of how you deal with kind of neighborhood relations. Okay.
But we won't make that a condition.
No, it's not a condition. I'm just saying, be good neighbors so that people don't make life miserable for you.
Okay. Move on? Item number 28, 2017-259BZ, 1760 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
The second floor was pulled back to provide a 24-foot deep rear yard at that level, except for a 6-foot wide portion adjacent to the attached house, which houses a bathtub. So I'd like to know what the reason for that little incursion is. You know, when I was looking at it, I thought, well, maybe it's a way to make the balcony more private, but the building is already extending beyond the rear of the neighbor, so why do you need that? So I didn't understand that, and yeah. The floor area was reduced slightly. It's still over 1 FAR, even though there's no usable attic. But I note this is partly because the lot is narrow, and the building is semi-attached with an undersized side yard. So that would make kind of it natural that you're going to have more floor area proportionate to the site if you have your non-complying side yard and you also go into the 20-foot. But I'm curious about why only sort of pull back on the second floor, just do it. You know. So, any other? No?
Item number 29, 2017-308BZ, 50 East 69th Street, Manhattan.
This was administratively adjourned pending LPC sign-off, and, yeah.
New cases, item number 1, 2017-247BZ, 1367 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, I didn't find proof of service of individual application, initial application to
Initial filing?
officials, but community board recommended approval, so they must have gotten it. So we just need to get that, make sure that's in the folder. We do have notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. They need to provide demolition drawings to show that 50% of the perimeter walls are being retained on the perimeter, and that 50% of the floor joists are being retained. They should use the model that's provided by our staff. The sections that they did provide show almost no joists remaining. 8 other houses on the social block have FARs in the 0.9 to 1 range. 7 other houses on the social block have lot coverage in the 40+% range. And with respect to the rear yard, adjacent houses have 27 and 30-foot rear yards, but the house to the rear has a 21-foot rear yard pursuant to a BSA permit that is two stories high. I'm not sure it complies with the plans, but there it is. Okay. Anybody else?
I thought this building could do a little bit of shaping.
Shaping?
Yeah. The existing building is quite large, and as you pointed out, the FAR analysis. The request that is before us is for 1 point, it's above what typically one sees. There are only 3 buildings that are above 1 FAR on that
No, this
block.
is they're proposing 1 FAR. They're proposing 4,016 1 FAR.
I did miscalculated.
Okay.
But again, going back, if that's the case, then on that social block, there are about 3 homes that have 1 FAR. On that block, there are only 3 homes that have 1 FAR. And the rest are in the range of 9.4 and 7.5. So I think from the context point of view, I just think that there should be a little bit more shaping.
Okay. So shaping at the rear,
Reducing the massing?
Just reducing massing.
Reducing
Okay,
the massing.
reduce the massing.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm being very vague. Reducing the massing is what I'm thinking. So.
Okay. Reduce massing. Okay. Because we often talk about how FAR isn't really perceived, but mass is perceived.
Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go on. Item number 2.
Before we move, just
So.
the side yard, the northern side yard is not shown on the site plan, so they can put that, because
The dimension, you mean?
yes. There is a dimension that says 5'7", but this is not the side yard. The side yard should be 5 feet, and it should be put in the middle where that recess is.
I
So
think-
they're retaining one of the existing side yards and the other one, they are in, on one portion, it's being enlarged and it's retaining 8 foot on that
Yes.
side, right?
So then
Yeah, I'm talking about the northern one. If you look at the site plan,
Yeah, they're making a side yard 5 foot and an 8 foot side yard is what they're saying.
Yes.
And they used to have a
Existing.
4 foot and an 8-10 side yard. So they're increasing both. They don't need side yard waivers as a result.
No.
They're increasing both, or let's say, they're increasing the 4 foot and reducing the 8 foot side yard, 8 foot 10 side yard.
yes, that's correct.
Right.
But the dimension is not
They're
on the
not
site.
dimensioned. Okay. Okay.
Item number 2, 2017-294BZ, 5527 Myrtle Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. We need the community board recommendation. The thing that's in the community board file is actually the borough president, who makes reference to the community board, but we don't have the community board. The borough president says that the community board voted to approve on condition, the condition being that the proposed PCE be properly soundproof, and the property owner must meet New York City landmarks requirements for the former Ridgewood Theater site, which they have to do, of course. And the borough president recommends approval on condition with the same conditions. We have one letter in support. We need DOI.
Yeah, we need DOI. I sent that out, and unfortunately, it hasn't responded back yet.
Okay.
But I do believe I have the community, all right.
No, we have a community board folder, but it.
No, I know, it's the
doesn't
borough
have that.
president's
Okay.
letter, but I did get something from the community board
Okay.
forwarded to,
Need to see that. And so, it doesn't seem to be open yet. But in terms of the insulation, I didn't see any sign on the drawings of hung or insulated ceilings below the residential portions of the building. They just show wall sections, and the walls go up against what potentially is a slab. I mean, I actually don't know. So, you've got residents right above this use. And it's not a place where they're arguably dropping 200-pound weights, but we've learned that treadmills, all those kinds of things create annoying noises.
I got the community board recommendation on June 1st, and I sent it to submit on June 1st, so I don't know what happened.
What can I say? Okay.
All right,
We do have LPC approval on this.
Yes.
right?
I'll send it to you. That's okay.
And anyway, it was a certificate of no effect.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Item number 3, 2018-11BZ, 1495 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, we do have proof of service of initial hearing to officials and of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community board recommends approval with one opposed. It's not built yet. We do have DOI, and we have fire department sign off as of May 29.
Is it a,
Not a
Legalization.
legalization, no, not built.
Yeah. May I go on?
Yep.
Item number 4, 2018-92BZ, 213 Bayside Avenue, Queens. This is a build-it-back project.
Right, so this one is Build It Back, where they're asking for a waiver of BSA rules, and it's demolition of an existing house with non-complying rear and side yards, and its replacement with a modular home that reduces the degrees of non-compliance and requires a waiver of side yard regulations. Right?
You go? Oh. Item number 5, 2018-93BZ, 7 Bevy Court, Brooklyn. This is another build-it-back project.
And again, they're requesting waiver of the BSA rules of procedure, and they are requiring side yard and front yard waivers to legalize a reconstructed home which deviated from the DOB-approved plans by literally 0.2 feet and 1.2 feet. And here they are for a special permit. And a few weeks ago, we had a hearing where the owner gets, what was it called? An as-built sign-off from the Department of Buildings, because the building is really not complying with the side yard regulations. It's off by like 3 feet or 5 feet or something like that, and it got a sign off as an as-built condition, right? And I find it kind of ironic that Build It Back has to come here for a special permit for 0.2 feet.
Yes, DOB sent them here.
Yes, yes, we know. We know they wouldn't be here if, I just find
appreciate the
that
irony.
really,
God.
super ironic. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Item number 6, 2018-94BZ, 105 Dare Court in Brooklyn.
So this is exactly the same. The waiver of BSA rules requires the side yard and front yard waivers to legalize an elevated home. So this is a home that just got lifted, and in the lifting, somehow, because, you know, you lift straight up, but maybe something goes a little bit off, in the lifting, it deviated from the DOB-approved plans by 0.5 feet and 0.7 feet.
Yeah.
And it has to come here for a special permit. Just saying. Okay, so that's what that is.
Okay, this concludes the public review session for June 4th, 2018.